Chapter 13. What indeed? What would have happened if the Russians went rogue? Marco asked rhetorically while thinking out loud. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. He answered his own questions as Annette, Leonardo, and Aurael started walking toward the hospital's west wing exit. I don't see the point in playing the what-if game, Annette shot back at him. It'll get us absolutely nowhere. Guys, do you want to share a cab? We're all heading toward the same direction anyway. Cheer up, Leonardo. You heard what the doctor said. Marguerite's just fine. Thanks, Annette, Leonardo responded, looking at her with an ashen face. I am still feeling as though we were caught up in one of those Twilight Zone episodes. It's absolutely surreal. I think this was just the opening salvo. There is more to come, Aurael said suddenly. Yes, I think so too, Annette concurred as she stared at him intensively. There is definitely more to come, she continued. Whoever is responsible for the Periton life-saving feat won't just sit idly by, bottling down such an amazing power. I am telling you, the world as we know it is but over. You sound pretty certain, Annette. Why would you say that? Marco looked at her, all puzzled. It's just a gut feeling I have. The way I see it, the genie was let out of his bottle, and he ain't going back. Maybe we can all have our wishes fulfilled, Marco added jokingly. Maybe, Aurael responded, laughing out loud. The group entered the taxicab at 28th and 1st. Annette sat next to the driver, and the three boys sat in the back still arguing about what it all meant. I bet you guys that we'll be mobbed by journalists tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those pesky reporters are already camping by our homes. After all, we're Marguerite's friends. Wouldn't they suspect that one of us was behind it all? Leonardo turned to Aurael, looking for confirmation of his assumption. No, I don't think so, Aurael replied confidently. We simply do not fit the profile of your typical psychic. Take a look at my father's research in the last 18 years. All those people who were found to be able to exhibit supernatural powers are in their late 30s. Most have an intense religious background, and all have practiced meditation for years, which, as you all know, is a prerequisite for a successful reality-altering manifestation, such as telekinesis or levitation. I bet none of you can sit still for 5 minutes, let alone meditate for an hour. So forget it. They won't be coming after us. If anything, they might stop by at Marisol Flora Gonzalez's house. She's the only one who is capable of willingly suspending a person in the air. Well, there is a problem with that hunch, Annette interjected. Which is? Aurael asked. Miss Gonzalez is in Spain, and has been teaching in Madrid since September. You don't suggest that her telekinetic powers are able to cross the Atlantic Ocean, and that she is somehow omnipresent? No, of course not. Back to square one, then, Marco summarized. Whatever it was, whoever it was, they were there with us at the observation deck. They witnessed the freak accident as we did, and acted instinctively, Leonardo added. Or they may have been down below at the street level, looking up and responding instinctively as you suggested. There is really no easy way to find out, Annette stated as she turned and looked at them, packed like sardines in the back of the cab. And as soon as Annette finished her sentence, both Leonardo and Marco appeared to have been sucked right into the cover page of an ESPN sports magazine that Aurael was holding in his hands, turning into images of football players dressed up in Chicago Blackhawk garbs. The two were positioned with the rest of the team players, smiling broadly and gazing at the camera. The photo of the two was so vivid that Annette felt they were about to continue the conversation that was so abruptly and unexpectedly interrupted. She had also noticed, with disbelief, that the driver next to her seemed to have turned into a very lifelike humanoid robot, or an android, and before she was able to say another word, she found herself disappearing and reappearing right next to Aurael in the back seat. Annette's jaw dropped as she observed that the taxi was no longer driving in New York's Upper West Side, but rather in a cartoonish version of it. The streets to her right and left looked as though they were brush-painted and taken right out of the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes. The colours were so bright and distinctive that she had to close her eyes and open them again. Her head was spinning, and she felt as though she was about to pass out. "Hey, are you okay?" Aurael whispered softly as he bent over to hug and kiss her. "Okay? Are you for real? You scared the living daylights out of me," she growled. "Well, you've been hinting all day long that you knew. I did not want to continue this charade with the guys. I wanted us to talk in private. Besides, I felt that a keen and sharp demonstration of reality-altering power will save us a lot of idle talk." "Nothing about all this is idle, Aurael," Annette replied. "I knew about your thought solidification ability for quite some time now. I saw you glow briefly at the lab when you created those frogs and mice. It was for a split second, but I noticed it nonetheless. I have suspected that you've had certain abilities for quite a while. I haven't forgotten about Tipsy and how you saved her. It all makes sense now." "Are you upset that I did not confide in you sooner?" "No, not at all. I knew that you'd eventually confess to being different. It was clear, however, that you needed to come to terms with it yourself before sharing it with others. You just caught me by surprise. I didn't realize that the extent of your ability is literally godlike. I have so many questions I want to ask you." "Yes, I do too. Am I even human?" There was an awkward moment of silence, which Annette broke quickly by saying, "I don't really care if you're human or not. You are you, the person I have known since I was 3 years old, the person I've shared so much with, and the one that I truly love. So whether you came here from Alpha Centauri or some other distant galaxy, you are still my Aurael. Your newfound abilities don't change any of that." "I love you too, Annette. I have never doubted your support, care, or true feelings for me. We grew up at Rhinefield, and we are no strangers to the paranormal. None of this should be too hard to believe or come as a complete surprise. It's important you understand that not pushing forward with this earlier is, by no means, an indication of mistrust on my part, or a debilitating fear that you may not accept me, or even reject me. I just do not know who I really am. I haven't spoken to my parents yet, but I have already told my mum that the 3 of us are about to have a serious heart-to-heart conversation tonight. Auntie Glenda, as you refer to my mum, knows. I'm confident both my parents know that I am the one who sent out that periton. I'm certain they knew all along about my abilities. I'm just not quite sure why they haven't mentioned any of it." Aurael stopped momentarily, catching his breath as Annette held his hands and said softly, "I have to admit, what you're able to do is far more advanced than anything we have ever witnessed, and unlike any of the other research subjects that have been studied thus far at the center. I am convinced there is no one on this planet quite like you. Your ability is godlike. It is out of this world. I wouldn't be surprised if you were an alien after all. Take a look at me as I really am, and judge for yourself," Aurael said abruptly, as his aura turned bright, like a golden star, and filled the car with intense, blinding light. His body was shimmering and glistening so fiercely that Annette yelled at him to turn it off as her eyes were beginning to hurt. Aurael complied, and his aura diminished instantly. "What was that?" Annette asked, still rubbing her eyes. "Well, that was me and my aura energy field, which pulsates at all times. It is in a constant state of a visible, glittering luminescence, which I'm able to control and hide from human sight. Can you imagine me walking around like a fireball? I'd freak everybody out. I can actually imagine you looking like that when you're about to save a life, just as you did earlier today at the Empire State Building. Sooner or later, you'll come forth as you truly are. I know it is bound to happen eventually." "Yeah, about that? I'm not quite sure what to do next. It is only recently that I have realized the extent of my ability and its seemingly omnipotent nature. I am hopeful my parents will provide me with some answers before we start plotting what we're about to do next." "We?" Annette looked at him, perplexed. "Yes, us, of course. We're a team, aren't we? We always were. You and I will sort this out." Aurael seemed somewhat sad and somber, as he began to contemplate the enormity of the life-altering significance of possessing such a mighty and supreme capacity. "My head is about to explode, Annette," he whispered softly. "I'm literally flipping out. It just dawned on me. You are right. I have a godlike ability. It is not a boastful remark born of pride or gloating, but rather a mere observation of facts. I am clueless about what I'm supposed to do about it. Annette, your insight, on the other hand, is always spot on. It is refreshing as it is helpful, now more than ever. You are my guiding light, Annette." The strain in Aurael's face was stark and acutely visible. His heartwarming sincerity and his childlike vulnerability brought tears to Annette's eyes. She leaned forward toward him, kissed him passionately, and then pulled herself away and looked at him lovingly as Aurael dried out her tears. "I am here, love. I always will be. I sense we're about to embark on a wild adventure, one that is unexpected as it is exciting and thrilling. As you said, we'll explore it together, one step at a time. We will figure out what it all means. I feel hopeful about what the future holds for all of us. Cheer up, my sweet, handsome Auraman." They sat there for a few more minutes, embraced in each other's arms, gazing through the cab's front window at the cartoonish street turning back into their original solid form. Annette vanished momentarily and reappeared sitting in the front seat next to the cab driver as Marco and Leonardo popped out of the ESPN magazine front cover, looking dazed and disorientated. "Did we just fall asleep?" Marco asked Aurael. "Yes, you both did," Aurael replied. "We are just all tired." "Driver, could you stop by 68th Street? Leonardo requested. "Yes, of course," the cab driver replied, and stopped by 68th Street and Broadway. "I'll see you guys tomorrow," Leonardo said as he exited the cab. "Have a good night's sleep, y'all." "Bye, Leonardo," Annette waved at him. "See you tomorrow." Marco got off at 73rd Street, and Aurael and Annette kept an eerie silence during the remainder of the ride, until the driver dropped them off at 80th Street and West End Avenue. "Will you be okay?" Annette questioned Aurael, sounding somewhat worried. "I'll be fine, Annette. This conversation with my parents is long overdue, and I'm actually looking forward to it. I'll tell you all about it." He smiled at her. The couple hugged and kissed for what seemed like an unusually prolonged embrace. Aurael just wouldn't let go as he quickly realized what needed to be done next. He must be reborn, accept his father's invitation, and reveal to the world who he truly was. Chapter 14. It was already 9:30 p.m., and Aurael was standing by the building elevator, feeling stressed and worn out. Tired? Fatigued? He thought. That doesn't seem right. What utter nonsense. I'm never drained or burned out. I just think I am, but I'm clearly not. Those terms do not apply to me. I can light up galaxies and dry up oceans. It is just who I am. Why am I even waiting for the elevator when I can simply dematerialize and rematerialize at the exact place I need to be? With every passing hour, it became clearer that his powers that have lain dormant for the last 18 years were surging, gushing, and swelling in each and every bone in his body, yearning and longing to erupt into the open in a mammoth display of wonderment, affecting everything in its path. Doubtless, he was a force of good, a kind-hearted person of a benevolent nature, whom the world has just gotten a glimpse of today. Aurael closed his eyes momentarily, and when he opened them, he was sitting on his living room sofa, right across Glenda and Osiris, who was standing a few feet away from him. "That was some grand entry, son," Osiris quipped as he and Glenda were rattled by their son's unexpected and sudden appearance out of nowhere. "Out with it, guys," Aurael griped. "Out with it." "Can we at least have some dinner first?" Glenda suggested. "I cooked your favorite dish, Aurael." "Yeah, I guess you were right, Mum. I could smell that fried chicken and cornbread a mile away. And just so we're clear, I'm not mad at you two. I am convinced you kept silent about all this for a good reason. Whatever your motives were, I am confident they were noble and had my well-being in mind. But it is time to move forward and chart a new course. I can no longer contain who I truly am or what I can do. I know you understand that. Aurael sighed briefly, and then stared directly at Glenda and said, "It's time to let go, Mum." Glenda couldn't contain herself and burst into tears. The level of maturity and compassion her son exhibited toward them both before learning of his extraordinary birth was thought-provoking, since most young teenagers in similar circumstances would probably respond angrily to being kept in the dark about something as monumental and life-altering, about who they truly were. "Come on, Mum, stop. It's okay, really." Aurael approached his mother and gave her a bear hug. "I know, love, I know." She kept on weeping. "I just refuse to let you go." "And where is it I am going, Mum?" Aurael quizzed her jokingly. "Any ideas?" They all erupted in laughter. They gathered around the kitchen table, listening to old-school classics and drinking non-alcoholic frozen margaritas. Glenda served a feast fit for kings, a mixture of southern cuisine with a dash of Scandinavian favorites, such as Swedish meatballs and Danish donuts for dessert. They were savoring and enjoying the food, laughing and singing to the tune of the Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes, when Aurael abruptly interrupted the festive mood and asked, "So, Mum, Dad, am I truly human?" "Yes, son," Osiris replied. "Of course you are. But the story of your birth is out of this world, to say the least. You knew for quite some time that your mother and I were not able to conceive a child. Thus we contacted the late Dr. Bearlight, a fertility expert who helped Aurora and Greg conceive Annette. What you did not know is that Dr. Bearlight was one of my early research subjects, a man with the unparalleled ability to solidify light into matter as well as shape and alter reality on a whim. Sounds similar?" He smiled as he stared directly at his son. "Anyway, the fertility treatment failed miserably, and we did not get pregnant. But here you are." "So, what are you saying, Dad? You wished me into existence?" "Almost, but not quite." Osiris abruptly and without warning signaled to Glenda, and they both extended their right arms, palms forward, toward the center of the table. Their bodies flashed as their auras ignited in a spectacular display of ethereal, lustrous golden light. They were both shimmering with splendor as the light bursting from their bodies streamed through their palms, colliding in midair to form a crystalline, translucent bubble about 3 feet in diameter. The bubble resembled a gigantic crystal ball, and soon enough, still images of the conception ceremony that took place 18 years ago appeared inside it. Here was Dr. Bearlight, giving a partial speech to Glenda and Osiris, followed by the astonishing and sensational fusion of their auras, culminating in Aurael's eventual emergence in the flesh out of solidified light emanating from an immense source of ethereal luminescence projected from above, as well as from 6 different directions. Aurael was stunned by the unfolding imagery and mesmerized by the explosion of the ceiling pendant into thousands of pieces suspended in the air, shaped in a form of a galaxy with an enormous effulgent star at its center. Aurael could have sworn he had seen that star before, but could not recall where and in what context. He was standing there, fascinated by the lifelike display of past events. He noticed suddenly that his parents morphed into vibrant, beaming orbs of light encircling the gleaming glassy crystal globe in an ever-increasing velocity, which ultimately turned it into a warping time bubble, displaying many of the events that have taken place since before his birth and after it, this time in a very real-time audio-visual setup. He was standing there startled by his parents' unexpected display of power, and gawking at the unfolding past episodes in the 3D virtual reality imagery, hearing the sounds and watching the images as they moved and bounced in perfect clarity. The eventual emergence of his fetus out of the sphere left him breathless, observing the intensity of the light used to solidify him into existence made him feel empowered and invincible. The enormity of his mind-blowing birth left the young teenager gasping for air and sent shivers down his spine as he began to fathom and realize the nature and essence of his being. A child of sheer energy, solidified into matter via the power of thought. It was as if he was staring at the emergence of an utterly new being into a world that was yet to unravel and reacquaint itself with its immense evolutionary potential. The images continued to flow inside the crystal time bubble as Oriel sat nearly motionless, getting an eyeful. He also witnessed the disappearance of Dr. Bearlight, the gathering of friends and family to celebrate his birth, the flight and fancy of Father Mulligan, and his early days as an infant materializing toys and other inanimate objects into existence. Suddenly, the crystal's translucence began to subside, and the images disappeared. The globe flashed and glowed intensely, as it finally dissolved into nothingness. Glenda and Osiris, still in their orb-shaped form, flew around the apartment in an incredible speed, appearing to chase each other, until they finally hovered by the table's chairs and coalesced back into their human forms, looking refreshed and energized. The three of them sat exchanging looks and staring at one another until Oriel finally broke the silence and said, "Well, that was unexpected. You caught me by surprise." "You don't say," Osiris replied somewhat sarcastically. "I'll say and keep on saying. What was that all about? Since when did the two of you possess such high-level powers?" "Since about a month or so before your birth," Glenda responded. "Are you astounded by that? You shouldn't be," she continued. "As it turns out, the apple did not fall far from the tree, but our abilities pale in comparison with yours. We are not able to solidify light into permanency as you do, and our level of influence on existing matter and reshaping reality is weak at best. You are one of a kind, son. There is no doubt about it." "Okay, Mum, I get that. Though I'm not quite sure how I feel about being conceived in such an unimaginable process. For some time now, I wasn't sure of my own humanity. I was convinced I was otherworldly. You know, an alien being." Oriel stopped for a moment and levitated a plate of donuts in his direction. He looked at his mum, saying, "These are simply irresistible." He continued, referring to his previous comment, "Well, evidently that is not the case. Was Dr. Bearlight of this world? After all, it is obvious and indisputable that, whoever he was the most instrumental element in my conception. If it wasn't for him, you would not have possessed such abilities, and I would not have been born." "You are absolutely correct, son. We wouldn't be as fortunate as we were if it wasn't for him. I have known Dr. Bearlight for many years, and before meeting your mum, I have never had any reason to believe he wasn't who he said he was. Though, I must admit that, in a month before your birth, his powers appear to have grown exponentially, thus raising some doubts about his true nature. Yet, I have determined that, whether he was truly human or some unknown hybrid of alien and human, it didn't matter. He was here to inoculate us with his benevolence and goodwill, a man of unparalleled compassion and grace. He brought so much joy to so many barren parents and was renowned for his altruism. No couple was turned away regardless of their financial standing, and at times he would provide his services for free. So you see, son, his origin was irrelevant. What mattered was his honorable humanity. And besides," Glenda added, "Dr. Bearlight saved your father's life. But that is another story." "Yes, I know, Mum. I saw it in the globe. It wasn't until he met your mum that the idea of conceiving you in a blast of Aurafusion came about. He knew that the news of the failed fertility treatment would break your mother's heart." "And he wasn't wrong," Glenda interjected. "I was devastated and heartbroken. I actually blacked out when I learned that my hopes of having a child were crushed. And then all these bizarre things started to happen around his office. Your father, of course, who knew about his abilities, didn't warn me at all. I thought I was losing my mind." "Well, that is all history now," Osiris intervened, But what happened to Dr. Bearlight? Aurael inquired. Surely you don't think he died? No, of course not, Glenda responded. That was just a memory implant he placed in the minds of all who knew us, along with a conceivable logical explanation of your natural birth at the hospital. Last we saw him, he was suffused in the sealing pendant, serving as the main power source for your solidification process. When the pendant exploded after your emergence, we thought he would rematerialize, but he didn't. We can only assume that he may have manifested himself somewhere else, but we just don't know where or why he chose to disappear. We consider Dr. Bearlight your godfather, Aurael, in every sense of the word, Osiris added, and we are looking forward to his return. There was a prolonged moment of silence as Aurael ingested the story of his birth and the significance of Dr. Bearlight in the lives of his parents and that of his own. Strangely enough, he did not feel like an aberration or miscreant. Quite the contrary. He felt unique and extraordinary, overjoyed by his association to Dr. Bearlight. It became clearer by the minute that he was to continue Dr. Bearlight's work, not as a fertility expert, but as a benign and compassionate benefactor to all humanity. Was it a mere coincidence that he was imbued with such godly powers by the doctor? Of course not. Was it coincidental that the manifestation of his powers required no meditation as the singularity of thought theory mandated? No. The doctor must have imprinted him with the ready-made ability as though he meditated for 1,000 years. The thoughts of the gracious and kind-hearted doctor filled Aurael with a tremendous sense of bliss, and in that moment of sheer conceptual delight, his aura flashed in a dazzling display of brilliant white light as he morphed into a bright and glittering star, reminiscent of that enormous, lustrous, sparkling star that appeared in the midst of that exploding pendant shards at the night of his birth. Glenda and Osiris exchanged stunned and panicked looks, pondering the significance of what they were witnessing, while scrutinizing their son's incandescent form from every possible angle. There was no doubt in their mind that the similarity was overwhelming. It was virtually identical. Their son, unknowingly or not, just assumed the shape of that star. Their eyes began to hurt as Aurael's blazing radiance was impossible to look at directly. They have shielded themselves with their own auras, but Aurael's magnificence was far too overbearing. "Aurael, son!" Osiris yelled. "Dim yourself out! Your aura is exploding through the concrete walls of this building. We don't want to attract unnecessary attention. Turn yourself off!" Aurael complied instantly, and his aura waned rapidly. He seemed somewhat disorientated and unsettled, as though he was unanticipatedly disconnected from a source of alternate existence known only to him. He regained his normal human form and sat on the chair with his eyes still closed. "Mum? Dad?" he finally said as he opened his eyes. I sensed his presence. Dr. Bearlight's, that is. You are right. He is alive. It's like an echo in my head, reverberating all around and filling me with confidence and calm. His re-emergence is only a matter of time. I'm certain of it. Yes, about that, Glenda countered. We are just as hopeful as you are, now that you have made your grandiose appearance. I'm confident he will reappear to lend a guiding hand. What is next, then? Aurael asked somewhat rhetorically. We are not sure, Osiris acknowledged. As contrary as it may seem to suggest to an 18-year-old adolescent, it is really up to you to decide where we go from here. Granted, you may be chronologically young, but we regard that as a matter of mere appearance. You carry the knowledge and imprinted experience of a fully mature adolescent. We will respect your choice, whatever it might be. Osiris gazed at his son momentarily and continued. You may choose to accept my invitation made earlier today at the news conference and expose your true identity, regardless of the impact it may have on us. I'm confident your mother and I can handle the media circus that will follow. Or we may indefinitely stall and inform the press of our ongoing investigation into the Perryton rescue, as well as other fantastic events that are likely to occur going forward, now that you can barely contain yourself. Dad, Aurael whispered softly, and then raised his voice. I have no desire to live in hiding. You and Mum have succeeded in your efforts in creating and shaping an environment that is accepting of ability-prone people. The ESP phenomenon, which was considered outright quackery, is now acknowledged as valid as the second and third laws of thermodynamics. And though fear of the unknown still lingers to a certain degree, it is beyond dispute that in the last decade, you have instigated a mental shift in the way humanity views its limitless potential and its eventual ascendancy in the evolutionary ladder. I will select the time and place at which to come forth and introduce myself as who I truly am. For the time being, however, I must focus my attention on what it all means. I know I must walk in Dr. Bearlight's path, but I'm not sure yet what that means exactly. I'm not even sure what the extent of my power is, much less what to do with it. Son, Glenda interrupted, this may sound like an overused cliché, but I reckon its usage is appropriate here. With great power comes great responsibility. Osiris continued Glenda's train of thought. Though it may not be clear what we ought to make of all this, doubtless you have been bestowed with these great powers for the greater good. What that greater good is will undeniably become clear sooner rather than later. You are correct, both of you, Aurael replied. Maybe part of it has something to do with the Malakarians. What did you just say? Both Glenda and Osiris cried out in unison. The Malakarians, you know, the ones Dr. Bearlight warned you about. Chapter 15. Monday, October 8th, 2012. The New York Institute of Technology cafeteria was mobbed with students gathering around Leonardo and Marguerite, who appeared to marvel at this sudden and unexpected overabundance of attention. Indeed, as a competitive gymnast, Marguerite had her fair share of fans, but nothing has come close to the level of interest expressed by colleagues and total strangers alike. Her picture riding unconscious on top of the Periton monstrosity was blown out and posted on bulletin boards and walls throughout the school. The entire incident, captured in numerous video feeds, was streaming in TV screens and cell phones, accompanied by comments suggesting possible explanations for the beast's appearance, as well as hope for the eventual emergence of the hero who saved her life in such a spectacular manner. "Look," said Bernadette, an exchange student from Paris. "I think that whoever saved her just realized they were in possession of such a startling ability. This was their first rescue attempt. Expect more such wonders in the days ahead." "I tend to agree," Joseph Muller, who recently immigrated to the United States from Austria, concurred. "But looking at the Rhinefield's cadre of research people, none exhibits an ability that is even remotely close to light solidification, or, in other words, the creation of solid matter out of sheer light. This is the first time we have witnessed such a phenomenon. So, if it didn't originate at Rhinefield, the person or entity responsible for it is right here among us. In NYC, that is." "Say what you want, guys, but I'm quite conflicted about the whole thing," Daryl, a red-headed basketball player, interjected as he was looking at one of the video feeds. "Don't get me wrong, I am nothing but thankful for whoever or whatever saved Marguerite's life, but such power can work in both ways. It is easy to wreak mayhem and destruction with the same ease as it saves lives." "Yes, and there is that," said Cassie LeBlanc, a gorgeous-looking 4'6" little person, who was one of NY Institute of Technology's brightest and most promising students. "Though I agree we should hold off judgment on the entity's intentions, I am certain, however, that we have nothing to fear. Marguerite's life was saved by a being that is no doubt benevolent in nature." "I couldn't agree more," said Annette, who joined the impromptu student gathering along with Aurael. "Let's just wait," she continued. "There is probably more of the same coming our way, as Bernadette suggested." "More of the same?" Joseph Muller inquired, raising an eyebrow. "Surely none of you is seriously considering the Periton rescue as a one-time occurrence? This is clearly the opening salvo. An intelligence of such vast, reality-altering power is bound to make its presence among us a matter of daily appearance." "And why is that?" Joseph further insisted. "Because unquestionably it is in the entity's nature," Cassie interjected, raising her voice. "No doubt, The unquenchable desire to right wrongs and exude goodness is the being's signature trait, a part of its psyche and innate impulse. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'm confident that life as we know it is but over. Cassie completed a sentence and stared at Aurael with her deeply penetrating baby blue eyes. Aurael's heart sank for a moment. Do you think she knows? He whispered in Annette's ear. No way, Annette responded. How? The gathering broke off as the students proceeded to their various classes. Cassiopeia, however, walked toward Aurael and Annette, waving at them with intensity and looking inside her book bag. Is something the matter, Cassie? Annette inquired. No, not quite, Cassie replied, smiling. Can I borrow your handsome hunk of a boyfriend for a while? I seem to have forgotten all about withdrawing funds from the bank earlier this morning, and I must make an urgent payment at the student's administrative office later today. I'll return him back to you as soon as we're done, I promise. Yes, of course, but only if you promise. Annette exploded in laughter. Here, he's all yours, she said, and waved goodbye to the two of them as she climbed up the staircase. Thanks, Aurael, for agreeing to accompany me. I assure you it won't take long. It's the Chase Manhattan branch across the street. No worries, Cassie, Aurael answered. And besides, we need to go over some details concerning the event we are planning for the kids at the Children's Aid Society. You are absolutely right. We'll stop by there as soon as we're done at the bank. When is your next class? At 1 p.m., isn't it? It's actually at 2, Cassie, so we have plenty of time. Cassiopeia LeBlanc was one of the kindest and most socially conscious people Aurael has ever met. She was a close friend and a confidant, and just as himself, was blessed with a photographic memory that seemed to have eclipsed his own. Her wit was unmatched, as was her deductive reasoning and penchant for all things science. Cassie grew up in a foster home, and sadly was subjected to ridicule and malicious jokes growing up because of her dwarfism. But, despite the mayhem she endured throughout the greater part of her young life, Cassiopeia never lost hope in humanity's capacity for good, and regarded her trials and tribulations as a catalyst for volunteerism and charity work. She loved children, and vowed to do her utmost best to improve the lives of the disabled among them. It was that quality of an amiable and kind-hearted spirit that brought Annette and Cassie together. They considered themselves sisters, and were close to each other as though they truly were. When Cassie fell ill because of unexpected side effects from a new dwarfism treatment, Annette sat by her hospital bed and kept her company for days. Aurael too spent some time with her, after which she was released fit as a fiddle. That is odd, Cassie said to Annette at the time. He touched my forehead and the pain just went away. I would have let him know earlier, but he was away with his parents, Annette responded. There is something about him, Cassie said in a very low voice that Annette could barely hear her. He's got the soul of a healer. If it's broken, he will fix it. It was only a matter of time before Aurael took notice of Annette's sister and realized she was a power to reckon with, not just because of her intellectual prowess, but mainly because of her sense of duty and unsurpassed love and care for the disabled. Is everything all right, Cassie? Aurael asked, as she appeared to be somewhat somber and gloomy. Yes, of course, Aurael. I just got a lot on my mind. I found out that one of the disabled kids, Tommy, at the Children's Aid Society, is dying of leukemia, and I am absolutely devastated by it. His parents are heartbroken and beyond themselves. He's such a brilliant young kid. It's not fair. How unfortunate can someone be? She said as tears filled up her eyes and streamed down her face. Is he currently in the hospital? Aurael questioned as he knelt over and hugged her, wiping the tears off her cheeks. Yes, she replied. He's at Memorial Hospital at New York Avenue, between 67th and 68th Streets. It's actually not far away from here. Well then, Aurael said in a clear and reassuring voice, why don't the three of us get there tomorrow? We may not be able to prevent the young child's death, but we can certainly make his final days the most memorable in his life. Yes, absolutely, Cassie acknowledged as she composed herself. He always wanted to go to Disney World, but his parents were never able to afford it. Maybe we should contact the Make-A-Wish Foundation and work out the necessary arrangements to ensure they all get there. Right on, Cassie. We'll do whatever is necessary, Aurael vowed. They arrived at the Chase Manhattan branch and stood in line, awaiting their turn. It was 11:45 a.m., and the bank was quite busy. There were about 30 people in the facility, of which 12 stood in line for the teller, while the others were scattered around the bank's various customer service departments. Suddenly, as Cassie was about to approach the teller, 3 masked gunmen stormed into the bank, brandishing AR-15 rifles and shooting toward the ceiling. "This is a stick-up!" yelled the tall and bulky one, who was wearing a brown sweatshirt and a pair of Air Jordan sneakers. "Everybody on the floor!" yelled the other bandit, forcing customers and employees to lie face down on the ground, while shooting more rounds right over the teller's area. The third robber appeared to have disabled the security officer by the front door, and pointed the AR-15 rifle to his head. "Don't move," he said, "or I'll blow your brains out." Cassie and Oriel lay on the floor, along with all the others. The heavy-set thug was demanding to see the manager, and threatened to execute hostages one by one unless he opened the bank's safe and filled up their bags with stacks of cash. Cassie was shaking and trembling with fear, as were all the other bank patrons. Some cried and begged the tall, bulky robber to spare their lives, while others pondered, in panic, the ever-increasing likelihood that they may meet their maker sooner than they have intended. "I got this, Cassie. Stay calm," Oriel whispered in her ear. He then gazed at the heavy-set robber and pointed his index finger toward him as he was still lying down next to Cassie, who looked back at him, not quite sure what she heard. A deafening sound shook the building as a mighty beam of condensed and concentrated light appeared out of nowhere and assumed the shape of a 7-foot-tall man dressed in a golden platinum armor suit with an infinity symbol emblazoned and circling across his chest. The man's suit radiated intensely and fiercely, discharging rays of bright yellowish light in all directions, appearing like a star that descended from the heavens. The man had no visible head, but rather a circular shimmering glowing aura, similar to a candle flame's halo, its luminescence expanding 2 feet in diameter and rotating around its axis. The creature somewhat resembled a majestic, faceless and wingless angel, exuding calm, tranquility, and peace. The robbers, who were completely caught by surprise, responded instinctively and shot at the glowing man from all 3 directions, emptying their rounds. The bullets turned into sparkling golden pellets in their flight, and landed softly at the man's lustrous armor, further increasing his resplendence. A pair of lips appeared unexpectedly in the creature's shimmering head, and a deep voice commanded the robbers, "Surrender, now." The lead gunman remained unfazed and undeterred, while the other bank patrons raised their heads off the ground, watching the ensuing confrontation with eyes wide open and looks of utter disbelief. "Who are you?" the gunman asked. "What are you?" "It matters not who or what I am. Surrender now, or bear the consequences of your malice." "You don't frighten us, freak. I bet you ran away from that wretched Reinfeld Institute. That house of horrors should be blown to bits, along with its necromancer chief and that pathetic excuse for a man, Professor Osiris Jones." "For a common criminal, you certainly have a way with words," the entity responded. "We may not be able to kill you, but if you stand in our way, we will execute these people one by one," said the bulky, heavy-set robber as he reached for his pocket, pulled out a Smith & Wesson pistol, and pointed it directly toward Cassie. The other 2 marauders reached for their pockets as well and pulled their pistols, pointing them at the bank's manager and his assistant. "Wrong move," the being's voice thundered across the room. "Behold," said the glowing man with an increasing, deafening sound, "experience the fear you so eagerly wish to inflict on others." The pistols disappeared out of the robbers' hands and reappeared aimed toward their foreheads as though they themselves were now being held at gunpoint. The guns' hammers were pulled straight back, while the 3 mortified thugs stared directly at the muzzles, awaiting their imminent death. 3 shots were fired all at once, and golden ethereal pellets whirled out of the guns and penetrated the assailants' foreheads, instantly engulfing them in bright yellowish light, similar to that of the entity's glowing luminescence. Their bodies soon vanished from sight, and all that remained was a floating, condensed, liquefied light, which radiated profusely and flashed repeatedly. The liquefied light coagulated and thickened swiftly into 3 ovum-shaped separate spheres. Hovering in midair and turning hot red, the floating spheres expanded and contracted, gyrating erratically up and down, moving left and right and circling around themselves in rapidly increasing velocity. until they finally solidified into what appeared to be ostrich-looking eggs, which descended smoothly onto the floor. The eggs cracked open simultaneously, and 3 winged homunculi emerged out into the open, flapping and batting their little wings and cawing loudly like crows. The scary-looking creatures appeared frightened and stood close to one another, continuing to caw. "What are these?" asked the startled manager, his hands still shaking. "These are homunculi, or homunculus, should you refer to them individually," said the being. "A grotesque, hideous, miniaturized, fully formed humanoid, an aberration of the alchemists of old, a creature of malevolence and utter distrust." The entity's lips stopped moving momentarily, and then continued. "A befitting punishment for human souls run amok." Another condensed beam of light struck the area over the homunculi and was immediately solidified into a 3-foot-tall dandelion-coloured birdcage, which glared for a few seconds before retaining its final shape. The homunculi continued to grunt and make high-pitched, guttural sounds as though they were attempting to talk in their former human language. Their faces were a distorted image of their former selves, twisted and perverted beyond recognition. They flapped their tiny wings repeatedly, flying around the cage and struggling to flee through its cracks, but to no avail. The cage levitated off the ground and floated toward the security guard, who was still standing by the bank's revolving door. "Mr. Edward." The entity called the guard by his name. "Yes, sir." "Take those 3 to the nearest police precinct and ensure they are placed in a holding cell," he said as the bank patrons got up on their feet and circled the being, marveling at his magnificence, awestruck and dazzled by his splendor. He continued, "In 7 days, the homunculi will regain their normal human form, ready to stand trial and pay for their crimes." He then looked at Cassie, who stood farther away by the opposite side of the bank's entrance, and smiled. And as he stood there observing her, a flame burst out of the creature's ethereal head and covered the stunned girl from head to toe. Cassie was engulfed in soothing flames of white light that appeared to emanate from within her and radiated extensively. She was lifted about 10 inches off the ground, turning around herself and spewing sparkles of luster in all directions. She finally landed gently on the floor, appearing serene and overjoyed, filled with a sense of calm and confidence. "May I ask what just happened?" she asked the creature while catching her breath. "You will soon find out." The man continued to smile, as the intensity of his luminescence diminished and waned, and his body began to fade out of sight. "Who shall we say saved us?" asked the manager. "Someone who cares," the entity responded. "Did you rescue that girl yesterday, at the Empire State Building?" inquired the assistant. "Yes." "What shall we call you?" Cassie asked. But the entity dissolved entirely as its brilliance filled the entire facility one last time, mending the cracked ceiling and repairing the broken windows. "Auraman." Cassie answered her own question. "Auraman." Chapter 16. Cassie and Oriel left the bank and paced back toward their school farther down Broadway. They stopped by at the next-door deli for some soda and snacks and were waiting by the sidewalk for the traffic light to change. Cold, crisp air was blowing in their faces, and heavy clouds suddenly covered the sky. "Are you cold?" Oriel asked as he noticed she was shivering. "Yeah, just a little bit. No biggie," she answered. "We'll stop by at the Children's Aid Society tomorrow morning," he promised. "Sure thing. Thank you, Oriel." As the two were about to cross the street, they noticed a huge crowd walking toward them and signaling them to stop. Before they had a chance to react, Cassie and Oriel found themselves surrounded by a sizable throng of people taking their pictures. Numerous cell phones were pointed at Cassie, videotaping her every move, and many long-lensed cameras have zoomed in directly at her face. "Do you know Auraman personally?" someone yelled at her. "Why did he hit you with that bolt of light?" asked another. "What do you think it means?" "How do you feel, Miss LeBlanc? Would you care to make a comment about what you have just experienced?" Cassie was shocked and dismayed by this sudden and unexpected invasion of her privacy. Unaccustomed to be the center of attention, unlike some of her classmates, she composed herself and took a deep breath and said, "No, I don't know Auraman personally, and I have no idea why he hit me with that bolt of light. All I know is that he saved my life and the lives of all the other people at the bank." Just as he saved Marguerite Tomlinson yesterday at the Empire State Building. I am forever indebted to him." "Do you know who he is?" asked a well-suited young man. "While being engulfed by an extension of his aura, did you get a sense if he was human?" she heard someone asking from far across. "No," Cassie replied. "I don't know if he is human, but I'm willing to bet that he is." There was nothing alien about his behavior. On the contrary, he seemed to care as though he was one of us. His morals appeared to reflect our own. He is kind and non-violent. He could have easily chosen to disintegrate the robbers into nothingness, but instead... Cassie stopped for a second. But instead, he transformed them temporarily into those creatures, whose name I can't even pronounce, as a befitting punishment for their crime, and until they stand trial. She continued as her eyes lit up. "Take notice. There is a new sheriff in town, who watches over us." Suddenly, a 2012 Subaru Legacy stopped by at the curb, and Annette's voice was heard through the window saying, "Hop in, guys, hurry!" she yelled. "A ride has just arrived," Aurael exclaimed. "Get in, Cassie." He gently pushed her inside. They sped away, as the ever-increasing number of onlookers packing the sidewalk murmured with disappointment at Cassie's abrupt departure. Annette was driving toward Times Square, courageously bypassing yellow NY cabs and almost going over the speed limit, agitating numerous drivers who hissed and cussed at her. Both Cassie and Aurael looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "What's going on, Annette? You're driving in the wrong direction," Cassie griped. "No, I'm not," she said somewhat impatiently. "You guys ought to see this." "See what?" Cassie persisted. "In a minute, Cassie, in a minute." They arrived at Times Square, and Cassie's jaw dropped in amazement as she watched herself on virtually every high-definition screen and billboard scattered around the square. It was an extravagant spectacle that Cassie could not have imagined in her wildest dreams. Here she was at the bank, levitating off the floor, engulfed in mysterious flames and looking transcendent. And here she was again talking to the creature and asking, "What shall we call you?" "Auraman," the billboards flashed in unison. "Auraman." The entire encounter, which was picked up by the bank's security cameras, was provided to the media, who wasted no time in splashing its contents on countless TV screens, not just those in Times Square, but also all over the world. Tourists and many passerbys were ogling and gaping at Auraman's grand entry, appearing out of nowhere and materializing out of sheer light, and is transforming the robbers into miniaturized winged humanoids and trapping them in a birdcage. "Mystery solved," beamed the gigantic ABC super sign. "Periton Rescue Unmasked," read the subtitle. "Auraman to the rescue," flickered the mammoth-branded Cities Nadask billboard. "Auraman the Beginning," echoed the adjacent billboard, poised directly above the famous New Year's Eve ball. There was a sense of bliss in the air. Clapping and praise could be heard everywhere. The square was mobbed by onlookers, riveting by the flashing video images and the ensuing captions, looking dazed and bemused with eyes wide open. They appeared to be hypnotized, as though subconsciously sensing an upcoming change, and not just any change, but also a monumental one, an earth-shattering transformation destined to turn our planet upside down. There was an expression of hope and longing in people's faces, an outright anticipation for relief from ongoing struggles and tribulations. Auraman's direct interference at the Empire State Building and the bank, in less than 24 hours, gave rise to a growing feeling of reassurance, of better days ahead, of a direct involvement of the supernatural in their lives, in ways found only in fairy tales and ancient myths. The impossible suddenly became possible, a living, breathing reality. And New York City found itself captivated and enamored by its addictive, alluring beauty. Annette sped farther down Broadway, making a right turn on 42nd Street and proceeding en route to West End Avenue. "Cassie," Annette hollered toward her friend, who was sitting in the back. "I'm taking you home. All remaining classes were cancelled for the day. We were all far too excited, students and teachers alike, to be able to focus on anything but what happened yesterday and today. It is simply overwhelming. If I am not mistaken, the President will be giving a speech later tonight." "I am not going home, Annette," Cassie interrupted her. "Would you mind dropping me off at Memorial Hospital? I must see Tommy. I promised him that I would visit today." "Are you sure?" Aurael inquired. I think you've been through a lot, don't you agree? Your nerves are absolutely rattled. You are in no shape for any hospital visit. Look at Dr. Oriel Jones psychoanalyzing me. Cassie giggled and burst into laughter. I'm perfectly fine, Doctor. Don't you worry. Annette proceeded uptown toward New York Avenue and 68th Street, driving somewhat erratically and arriving at the hospital's front entrance in 5 minutes. That was incredibly fast, Annette. I'll call you guys later, Cassie said as she exited the car and waved them both goodbye. You make sure you do, Annette howled back at her. Cassie disappeared inside the crowded hospital reception area as Annette paused for a second, looking shortly in the mirror and then staring at Oriel. Now what? She asked. Now we go home, he replied. I have a surprise for you. Really? What kind of surprise? Well, if I told you, it wouldn't be much of a surprise, would it? Oriel countered. You're right, I guess. Anyway, I'm dying to hear all about what happened in the bank and the conversation you had with your parents yesterday evening. Was that really you at the bank? Or did you solidify light in the form of Auraman, as you did with the Periton? No, Annette. That was really me. But how is that possible? Annette insisted. You were lying there on the floor next to Cassie, holding her and shielding her. We all saw that. I believe I am omnipresent, Oriel responded. I can simultaneously be here with you as well as anywhere else. Granted, it appears as if I am the physical embodiment of quantum mechanics on the macro level. The electrons in my body vibrate so fast it enables me to be present everywhere at the same time, if I consciously choose to do so. Wow, Annette muttered in astonishment. But wait, I thought I saw you point your index finger directly at the location where the heavyset robber was standing, and that was followed by the appearance of the condensed beam of light that solidified into Auraman. Isn't that how you usually solidify thoughts into existence? Yes, that is true. My aura would immediately respond to my thoughts and congeal into living matter in the shape and form I visualize, in response to the incident at hand. But in that instance, I decided to personally intervene, and vibrated myself onto that spot by the robber, and appeared as I really am. Well, the suit was an add-on, of course, and is now associated with that tall man identified as Auraman. Strange that Cassie chose that name, Oriel continued. Thus far, it was only you and my mum who referred to me by that name. Well, who wouldn't? Annette smiled toward him and then said, It's the first thing that comes to mind when people look at you. Your aura is so bright and radiant when you manifest yourself as you truly are. We are compelled to raise our hands and protect our eyes from your dazzling brilliance. Frankly, I couldn't think of a better name. Annette, Oriel said, we're here. Would you like to come up? No, I'm tired. Let me take a quick shower, and I'll meet you later on at about 4:30 p.m. Can you at least tell me where we're going? We're going on a tour. What tour? She asked him with an odd expression on her face. You'll see. He smiled at her as he exited the car, waving goodbye to her and walking toward his building entrance. Chapter 17. As a matter of habit, Oriel found himself waiting by the elevator yet again. This will take some getting used to, he said to himself as he disintegrated into nothingness and reappeared in his room. Mom? Dad? Are you guys here? He yelled as he was walking toward the living room. Mother, where are you? Oriel asked in his mind. Right here in the White House with your dad, he heard her reply. Can you actually hear me? He asked. Yes, I can. I'm not sure how. We haven't communicated telepathically before. Her voice kept echoing in his mind. No, we haven't, Oriel replied. There are many abilities I might be in possession of that have not yet surfaced. I found out earlier I am omnipresent. His mother asked, Are you saying that it was you at the bank? I thought you solidified Auraman into existence, just as you did with the Periton. That was me. Annette asked me the exact same question, he said. Does she know? Glenda asked, sounding anxious and alarmed. Of course she does, Mum. We have no secrets, he replied. I see, son. Her voice continued reverberating. That was some performance at the bank, dear. It left many officials here pondering what next is to come. We were requested by the President to arrive at D.C. and update him in person on our findings. We will stall in your behalf, if necessary, but eventually you'll have to come out, particularly if you continue saving people's lives in this spectacular, unprecedented manner. Come out? Oriel giggled in his mind. Come on, you silly boy, you know what I mean. He heard her laughing uncontrollably. Eventually, you'll have to make your identity known. You can't remain faceless indefinitely. You're right, he said. But let me just reiterate what I said to the both of you yesterday evening. It may take some time for me to reach an understanding of what role to assume in our society. And there is also the matter of realizing the full extent of my powers before putting them to good use. You may tell the President, however, that you have been contacted by Auraman, and that he would appear on a major television event, revealing his true identity. Glenda said, We'll do just that, dear. We should be home by tomorrow afternoon. Say hi to Dad, he asked as he terminated the connection. Oriel was still preoccupied in contemplation of his newfound telepathic ability, and didn't realize that his cell phone was ringing. He reached forward and finally grabbed it, noticing it was Annette. But before pressing the answer button, he responded instinctively and said in his mind, Hello? Oriel, is that you? He heard her voice asking. Yes, it's me. She heard what she thought was Oriel's voice. Don't be alarmed, he continued. It appears we no longer need cell phones to communicate. I just need to think about you. And if you happen to be attempting to contact me, I'll hear your thoughts telepathically. Alarmed? She asked. What other tricks are you planning on pulling out of your hat? I'm learning to expect the unexpected from you. Her voice continued to oscillate. Anyway, I'll be in your place in about 15 minutes. May I ask where we are going? He replied, We're going to Pier 84, Hudson River Park, to watch the sunset. It is one of the best places in the city to watch it. How romantic of you. Is that the surprise? Annette asked. No, Annette. That is not the surprise, he said. You're such a tease, Oriel. I know it's not. Anyway, I wanted to hear all about your conversation with your parents yesterday evening. Annette's voice dissipated into oblivion, but Oriel's mind was immersed with endless thoughts about today's events and the concept of absolute power. He dreaded the possible negative impact that omnipotence might bear over its holder. It seemed virtually certain he was transforming into something more than a man, something that most human beings would refer to as a god or a deity. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, he kept hearing repeatedly. What a cliché, he muttered to himself. It has nothing to do to me. I may possess godly powers, but it's humanity that owns them. I'm not looking for self-aggrandizement, but to serve and heal. Nor am I concerned about wealth or material possessions, as I can manifest them into being if I so choose. I want to bring positive change in people's lives, spread light where there is darkness, bring joy and peace where there is pain and suffering. True, Cassie, Annette and I are involved in a great deal of charity work and volunteerism, but bring light where there is darkness? Sounds like a job for a deity. I am no deity. What is happening to me? Are these really my thoughts? Maybe they are Dr. Bearlight's thoughts. I'm not even sure anymore where his thoughts begin and mine ends. Oriel was lost in a whirlwind of nagging reflections about his role in the world, and had completely forgotten about Annette, who was waiting for him downstairs. His cell phone rang. Where are you? Annette hollered. I'm downstairs waiting for you. I'll be right there, he said, and materialized himself next to her the following second. God, Annette said as she reached forward and kissed him. I'll never get used to that, or to communicating with you telepathically, she giggled, and waved her phone at him. She drove toward Pier 84, and complained about possibly missing the sunset, only to find herself and Oriel a moment later, sitting by the pier's dock overlooking the Hudson River. Why do we even bother to use a car if you can just pop us in and out of places? She asked him, chuckling. They were sitting there by the dock, wrapped in each other's arms and resting their heads on each other's shoulders, gazing intensively at the flaming yellow-red sun, and then looking at each other and nodding in agreement. It was a breathtaking sight, a cacophony of dancing rays hitting the waters and bouncing back in all directions in a symphony of lights that intoxicated their senses, a marvelous sight of natural beauty that brought into mind a soulful longing for communion with the divine. The sound of the waves hitting and splashing against the pillars below added to the feel of a calm, pastoral atmosphere. It's just wonderful, isn't it? Annette whispered in Oriel's ear. Yes, Annette. It is peaceful as it is calm. It quiets the mind. I bet a quiet mind is what you most certainly need, Annette replied. The last 2 days resemble a high-speed ride. How was dinner with your parents? I am assuming you're referring to the conversation I had with my parents about the origin of my abilities? But of course, what else would I be referring to? And by the look on your face, I can safely say that you are not an alien, she cackled. I am perfectly human, he answered, made of solidified light, but my conception is an entirely different matter. Do you mean the fertility treatment administered by Dr. Bearlight? I know all about that. Aren't you forgetting? It's the same doctor that made my birth possible as well. But I wasn't born through a fertility treatment, Aurael griped. It didn't work in my case. It totally failed. So, how were you born then? Annette quizzed. Aurafusion, he said as he looked at her befuddled facial expression. Aurafusion? What in the name of God is that? Why don't I show you? He said, and held her head in the palms of his hands, directing her attention toward the water about 100 feet away. What do you see, Annette? I see the reflection of the sun hitting the water. Take another look. What do you see now? Focus, Annette. Focus. I see the reflection of the sun hovering over the water. Oh, my God. This is so amazing. It's spectacular. I'm drawn toward it. What are you doing to me? She asked, her voice cracking. You're completely safe, Annette. Relax. In a minute, you'll be swept entirely into the sun's glowing reflection, right at the center of its corona, and relive my memories and all the events that have transpired before and after my conception. You'll be able to view firsthand how it all began, starting with my mum's visit to Dr. Bearlight's office. Merge with the sun, Annette. Become fully immersed in its light. You are the only one seeing this. Annette felt as if she was entirely absorbed by the sun. A pleasant tingling sensation vibrated throughout her body, as she was swooped wholly right into its luminous floating reflection, leaving behind what appeared to be another her. This is crazy, she thought. I am here and there, in 2 places at once. No, you are not losing your mind, she heard Aurael telepathically responding to her inner conversation. I have created a temporal plane of existence so you may revisit my past in the most vivid way possible, while the other you is sitting here with me for the convenience of those around us who might be watching. It shouldn't take long. You'll be back to your original self in about 5 to 10 minutes. You may walk around that made-up environment, observe all the images, and listen to all the sounds as the past unfolds itself in front of you, one segment at a time. Enjoy the ride, sweetheart. Aurael's voice faded away, and Annette found herself in Dr. Bearlight's clinic reception area, staring intensely at Glenda as she was sitting there and waiting, lost in her thoughts. She followed Glenda into Dr. Bearlight's office and witnessed their conversation and the ensuing events that followed. The past episodes of Aurael's life kept changing in accordance with their chronological timeline, and Annette realized she was fully immersed in a captivating tale of absolute wonder, as if she was witnessing the unfolding of a new beginning in human history, a monumental new chapter in humanity's advancement toward a yet unknown future. She was overwhelmed by a sense of paramount responsibility and obligation. After all, she was a close friend, a confidant, and the love interest of the entity known as Auraman, who relied on her judgment and trusted her opinion. He clearly marveled at their inseparable bond, and looked forward to being supported by her wisdom in charting a course to positively channel his godly powers. Indeed, she was acutely aware of the tremendous importance their relationship carried in jointly deciding their next step in this unexpected adventure, and the thought of it made her agitated and jittery. She listened to Aurael's discussion with his parents, and agreed that time was indeed of the essence in conceptualizing a working path that would eventually culminate in his emergence, and finally disclosure of his identity. A pleasant sudden jolt caused Annette to swerve and depart from her staggering, mind-blowing trip. She could feel her organs come to life again as she was transported back to her original self. "You're back," Aurael greeted her. "How was it?" "Magical," she replied, as she pressed her lips against his and kissed him passionately. The sun finally set, and it was getting darker by the minute, Many of the people who were touring around the pier walked toward 44th Street, taking off in droves. It was a mass exodus of sorts, as though they were compelled to turn away, leaving Aurael and Annette alone, and all by themselves. "Why is everybody leaving?" Annette inquired. "Because I want them to." Aurael giggled at her. "We'll be needing some privacy." "Why? What did you have in mind?" She giggled back at him. "Well, didn't I promise you a surprise?" "Yes, that is right. What is it?" "Let's wait until it is absolutely dark," he said, and continued smiling at her. "Cut that out, Aurael. What's the darn surprise?" Annette cried. "Come out with it already." Okay, he laughed. "Do you remember the Arabian Nights stories your mother used to tell us when we were kids?" "Yes, of course. How can I forget? Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, or Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves." "Right. But there was one story you liked in particular, The Thief of Baghdad. And, if I recall correctly, it was the magic carpet in that tale that fascinated you the most." "That is correct?" Annette nodded in agreement. "For years, you dreamed about flying on one of those rugs, particularly after watching that 70s movie Arabian Adventure." Aurael continued. "Well, tonight you're about to experience firsthand what a true ride on a flying carpet feels like. We're taking an aerial tour of NYC, starting with the Statue of Liberty, which, shame on us, we haven't been to, and then Ellis Island, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Empire State Building, and the rest of the NYC skyline. We'll stop by at the George Washington Bridge and Central Park." "You've got to be joking," Annette cut him off in mid-sentence, thinking he was simply being whimsical and playful. "No, Annette, I'm not," he said as he leaned forward and rubbed his fingers through her long hair. "You know, these powers of mine come without any strings attached. They are part of who I am, and I may use them not just for the purpose of saving lives and exacting justice, but for trivial things as well, such as taking a ride on a gliding carpet with my girlfriend. And this is not just any carpet. It is the one you visualized when Aurora read us that story. Yes, Annette, the one with the angelic pure white wings." "You're just so theatrical," Annette responded, smiling broadly, as her eyes lit with anticipation. "I'm stunned that you even remembered the fairy tale hour with my mum every Friday night, where I was the princess, and you were the prince saving me from all those demons and grotesque monsters." "That is some surprise, Aurael," she said, pulling herself toward him and resting her face on his broad chest. "But wait," she continued. "Wouldn't that be a spectacle observed throughout the city? Won't we be seen?" "No, not exactly. But the winged carpet in Auraman will be very much seen, and I'm sure that it will serve as another news item later this evening." "Is that what you're after? Media exposure?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "No, not at all. But with every act of wonderment I launch, people become more accustomed and familiar with this emerging new reality, accommodating it and embracing it as it is, rather than dreading it. As you saw earlier this afternoon, people are excited about Auraman and look forward to see more of him rather than less. I intend to fulfill that expectation, while not shying away from putting my powers to more mundane usage as well." "I see you got it all sorted out," Annette replied. "Et ego, you seemed at a total loss." "Well, Annette," Aurael paused and took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I sorted anything yet, since it is not clear to me what role people want or expect Auraman to assume. I know that saving lives and upholding our moral values and rules of conduct is the general direction Auraman should follow, but the details of that route are still murky and unclear." "I agree," Annette concurred. "It is too early to designate a coherent, clear role for Auraman. It's a bit reminiscent of a god descending from heaven and choosing to dwell among us humans. What capacity is that deity to assume in a democratic, freedom-loving society by virtue of his omnipotence? I do not know the answer to that." "Wow," Aurael muttered. "It's rather inaccurate, isn't it? A god? The analogy is somewhat off, don't you think? True, I appear to have powers that resemble omnipotence, but we do not know that I am actually omnipotent. Am I immortal? I do not know the answer to that question either. Did you consider that I may be vulnerable to some not yet disclosed power or influence? It is possible, only a matter of time before a way is found to stop me by those humans who hate and detest everything that is good and peaceful. I assure you that people that thrive on violence and wish to wreak havoc and mayhem on our society won't sit idly by while I might be asked to alter the very fabric of our society. And besides, if you recall, Dr. Bearlight warned my parents about the Malakarians, which we all don't have a clue who or what they are. I firmly believe that my presence here has something to do with that, more so than the idea of an alleged deity interacting and living with humans. Fascinating, Oriel, Annette gasped in response. I'm just so intrigued by all this. I have so many questions that I'd like to ask. I wonder, however, what Dr. Bearlight had in mind when contemplating solidifying you into existence via Aurafusion. Did he attempt to set up a new process for human procreation? Or was it a one-time event meant to bring you into being for a very specific task? Maybe both, Oriel answered. Doubtless he wanted to provide barren couples who are not successful in conceiving through traditional fertility methods with the visual imagery that may assist them in becoming pregnant. He may have thought that there were other people out there, just like him, with a similar ability that would gladly step forward and assist those couples. I'm reluctant to assume that he wanted to replace natural sexual conception with Aurafusion. He more likely intended to offer an alternative to those unfortunate couples whom nature stripped of the capacity to bear children. Oriel suddenly asked Annette, I'm not boring you, am I? Are you out of your mind? She cackled. Of course not. Go on, please. I am certain, however, that Dr. Bearlight's intention in facilitating my birth was more than just the mere assistance to my parents. He was acquainted with my dad's life's work, and thus chose him as the father of the first Aura-born child, to whom he obviously assigned unique abilities for a purpose we are yet to unravel. He called on 6 different godly thought forms, and somehow transferred their combined energies and that of his own into my very essence. Though my genetic makeup is entirely human, he imbued me with the power of creation itself. My parents and I are quite confident that Dr. Bearlight is alive and may still return, and though I am not able to sense him telepathically, his echo resonates in my very being. Oriel paused and remained quiet momentarily. He grabbed Annette's hand and walked toward the edge of the dock. It's totally dark, Oriel. Where is my magic carpet? She asked, laughing. Coming right up, Your Highness, he said as he flashed for a second, pointing his finger toward the water. Look over there. He drew her attention in the direction of the Hudson River, about 10 feet away. Droplets of golden light hovered the water and spiraled around themselves in a dancing motion, moving simultaneously in 4 different directions, and formed a 15 by 13 foot gigantic gleaming carpet, adorned with Moroccan trellis geometric shapes. The enormous rug levitated over the water, while a set of angelic wings sprang out of its sides. The wings ruffled, flapped, and spread wide open, unfolding their breathtaking, graceful glowing beauty as the carpet advanced toward Annette and Oriel, hovering by the waterfront. Hop aboard, Oriel yelled excitedly at Annette, as they were both lifted in the air, landing softly on the spellbinding enchanted carpet. Up, Oriel yelled, up! It was a comfortably cool and pleasant night. Patchy clouds dotted the skies, with only a few stars seeping through, while a mild breeze caressed Oriel's and Annette's faces as the glittering, flying object ascended high into the heavens, leaving behind it a lengthy trail of sparkling golden dust. At about 300 feet over the Hudson River, the carpet stopped its ascent and glided south toward the Statue of Liberty. A few minutes later, it hovered near the statue's crown, slowly circling its 7 spikes, to the utter amazement and disbelief of the spectators, who were snapping photos and videotaping the soaring winged craft in all its magnificent glory. Numerous cries could be heard from all sides of the crown. Look, it's Auraman! It's Auraman! They shouted, as Oriel transformed himself into the life-saving entity that appeared earlier at the bank. The loud roars of, "Oh wow!" and "Yay!" coming from the mountain's direction pierced through their quiet flight path, till Annette felt compelled to cover her ears. Oriel veered the carpet away from the spectators, thereby showering them with golden soot, which made the crowd even more vacuous and overjoyed. The rug continued its climb farther and farther into the skies, soaring into the upper troposphere, bypassing the patchy clouds, and heading toward an ocean of glimmering stars, flickering in amazing unison as though by command. Now it was Annette's turn to exclaim wow, and stare in fascination at the sheer vastness unfurling in front of her. "This is absolutely breathtaking, Aurael. I have never seen so many stars. It's so incredibly bewitching. How is it they all flicker as one?" "They are not really," Aurael answered. "It is just a visual effect created for your benefit. I knew you'd like it." "Hey, wait a second," Annette said. "Where are you steering this thing? We are nowhere close to the NYC skyline." "Hold on tight," Aurael cried in response. "This is one detour you will never forget, dear." To her astonishment, Annette noticed that both she and Aurael, as well as the carpet, were gradually turning into a weightless mass of infinitesimal particles, radiating intensely and profusely until their original forms completely dissipated into an ethereal concentration of dancing photons, coagulating and coalescing into a sparkling tail of light that flashed through the night sky, shooting across the Atlantic Ocean, and rematerializing a flicker of a second later over Paris, right above the Eiffel Tower. Annette's entire body was shaking and trembling with excitement as it re-emerged, regaining its solid mass and coalescing back into its original form. "Are you okay?" Aurael asked her, sounding somewhat concerned. "I didn't mean to freak you out. It's simply a shortcut." He held her close to his body while calming and soothing her jittery nerves. "You'll get used to it eventually," he continued. "Decomposing into light particles, that is. We don't really need a flying carpet to travel anywhere around the world, but it is exciting nevertheless." "Yes, it is exciting," Annette concurred. "Particularly to the people down below, watching this UFO of ours, waving their hands in hello, just as our fellow New Yorkers screaming their lungs out as if you were some sort of rock star." Indeed, the winged carpet glided above the Eiffel Tower near the observation deck, as throngs of people gathered around to get a closer look of the opulent flying object illuminating the Paris night sky with an almost esoteric glow of brilliance that extracted an ecstatic reaction from the multitude of onlookers gawking at the eye-popping spectacle in utter shock. Le tapis volant, i.e. flying carpet in French, continued its glide through the Parisian skyline, hovering over some of Paris's most notorious tourist attractions, such as the Arc de Triomphe, Grand Palais, Notre-Dame de Paris, Montmartre, and Sacré-Cœur Basilica, to the sheer delight of the thousands of observers below who were snapping photos incessantly. Le Tapis veered sharply north toward the English Channel, ascending high into the sky and disappearing as it drifted and fluttered in the direction of London. "Are we going where I think we are going?" Annette asked in elation. "Yes, we are, sweetheart," Aurael chuckled. "London is next. Hold on tight," he yelled as they picked up speed, while the wings went out full span, flapping intensely, sending wave after wave of powerful reverberations minced with golden dust particles. Annette was sitting calmly at the center next to Aurael, who appeared to be in his natural acute brilliance, yet unlike before, she could look at him directly, and without being blinded by his overwhelming brightness. "This was entirely unexpected," she said as she held his hands, bathing herself in his light. "I just don't know what to say. I'm struggling to verbalize what's going through my mind. I'm overtaken by a sense of happiness I have never experienced before. I feel as though I am daydreaming, as if I was transported into one of Steven Spielberg's sci-fi movie sets. This is so unbelievable. I think I'm losing my mind." "Calm down, Annette," Aurael whispered softly as he wrapped his arms around her in a reassuring hug. "This is not a dream, and I am not an imaginary childhood friend that suddenly and unexpectedly came to being. This is real. I am real, and this experience, as well as those that are yet to transpire, are part of who we are. I can't see myself being amid all of this without you beside me. I love you, Annette, more than you can possibly imagine." Their lips locked as the London skyline could be seen in all its greatness, while the carpet swerved right in the direction of the Thames River, fast approaching Big Ben by the Palace of Westminster. "Hey!" Annette exclaimed as they began their descent. "It's the clock tower! Wow!" "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?" he concurred, as they wafted smoothly over the water. "Let's take a closer look. I think the Londoners are expecting a show, and I don't intend to disappoint them." As they approached the massive clock, A slither of light burst out of Aurail and flew in the direction of Big Ben, hitting it right in the center. The entire structure shook while the clock emitted strings of dazzling condensed rays, as if it were a planet about to go supernova. The tower appeared to be engulfed in mind-numbing ethereal flames that lit up the dark and soggy London skies, and igniting a swarm of people down below as they ran and dashed toward the building, hoping to catch a better glimpse of the celestial glowing cloud encompassing it. The cloud radiance grew so strong that it seemed ready to explode, yet it continued to shimmer until it finally burst like a shooting star, while the clock continued to shine brightly, tossing sparkling particles up through the air and in all possible directions, hitting all nearby buildings and monuments, as well as a legion of spectators, who absorbed the shattered brilliance directly into their bodies, and thereby turning into lustrous human torches. The sudden suffusion of this transcendent beaming energy appeared to have caused an abrupt anti-gravitational force that resulted in people being lifted in the air, hovering and floating around like bubbles shot out of a bubble gun, while their bodies continued to shine like miniaturized planetoids. The sight was one of biblical proportions, reminiscent of the rapture foretold in the Book of Revelations. Yet, this defying gravity event was not of an apocalyptic nature, but rather a joyous occasion where the affected crowds were struck by a staggering jolt of sheer delight and contentment that rivaled an outright religious nirvana. It was as though Father Mulligan's ability to levitate turned contagious and caught fire in the centre of London, sending children and adults alike into a flight of fancy, hopping on top of rooftops, chimneys, treetops, and the nearby Palace of Westminster, as well as the adjacent Westminster Bridge. There were screams of fright, mingled with those of pure glee and loud laughter, as some women opened their umbrellas, jokingly mimicking the beloved character of Mary Poppins. Others were flapping their hands like birds, flying toward the clock and sitting on its hands, pretending to be Peter Pan characters, while some were breaststroking through the open air as if they were swimming in water. But the vast majority simply floated aimlessly as the wind scattered them around and high above the Thames River. Aurail and Annette watched the ensuing pandemonium with outright delight, basking in a childish sense of mischievousness, and actively sharing in the intoxicating emotional feast that exploded in front of their eyes. There was happiness all around them, the kind of contentment that is rarely observable, a state of serenity and an outpouring of delight. As the couple continued to marvel at the Londoners' excitement, the energy blast began to wear off, causing a gradual restoration of Earth's natural gravitational force. The many attendees to this once-in-a-lifetime event began descending softly onto the ground, as their lambent auras waned and wafted away. Cries of disappointment could be heard from several directions, as well as those of farewell and goodbye. Big Ben continued to beam for a while longer, until it finally stopped radiating about 10 minutes later, but the golden soot that filled the air refused to evaporate, lighting up the nearby vicinity with an eerie, mysterious glare, while the winged carpet ascended slowly into the sky to a loud chorus of cheers, goodbye, and adios amigo. "Are you planning on pulling other rabbits out of your hat?" Annette asked, snickering. "One final stop." Aurail chuckled. "We're going home. I saved the best for last." "And what could that possibly be?" Annette persisted. "Hold on, dear," Aurail replied as his aura gushed through the carpet, engulfing them all and instantly morphing their corporeal forms into photonic particles. They whooshed through the night sky and crossed the Atlantic Ocean, leaving an awe-inspiring comet-type trail behind them. An instant later, they materialized right by New York City's Chrysler Building, about 700 feet above the ground. The sudden appearance of Auraman in such relative proximity to the ground caught New Yorkers down below in utter surprise and gave them a sense of incredulity. Like thunder in broad daylight, the subject of today's most exciting news popped out of the blue right in front of the very same eyes that have witnessed the Perryton rescue, as well as the bank rescue just mere hours earlier. This totally unforeseen and unexpected close encounter of the fourth kind with the city's now new undeclared hero created an almost instantaneous mass hysteria of fans running and clamoring for a better viewing spot under the hovering carpet, so they may catch a first-hand glimpse of Auraman, shining brightly and lighting up the adjacent skyscrapers. The crowds went wild, congesting 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue, dazzled by the rug's angelic wings which span across from one side of 42nd Street to the other. Aurael was overtaken with emotions as he noticed the many love signs that countless people made with their hands, while others were clapping in elation, chanting, and screaming his name repeatedly. Auraman! 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 The chanting continued unabated, while a star-shaped glinting substance began to form about 250 feet above the celebrating crowd. The star-shaped matter began to circle around its axes, instantly approaching a blinding and unfathomable speed, until it lost its original shape, morphing into an immense golden pyramid adorned with the Eye of Horus emblazoned in each and every one of its triangles, and a glistening orb spun on top of its apex. The vast and magnificent structure floated far below the carpet and closer to the revelers, moving slowly around itself while the orb was picking up speed and spinning manically, phasing in and out of existence. "My fellow New Yorkers," a voice echoed in the minds of thousands of pedestrians below, gaping at both Auraman and the pyramid. The inner voice continued, "I thank you for your warm and gracious welcome. Behold, my gift of wonder. For the next 10 minutes, you may turn yourselves into whatever your hearts desire. Transform yourselves into fire-breathing dragons and experience the delights of flight, soaring high above the clouds. Turn yourselves into wizards of old, the emperors of ancient Greece and Rome, or perhaps the gods of Mount Olympus. Indulge in your fantasies and experience the sheer, unadulterated sensation of true freedom. Let the joyride begin." The phantom sound subsided as the spiraling orb was brewing with unrecognizable white gaseous energy, which flickered on and off in a measured, steady pace. The energy appeared ready to burst out of the orb, but instead, a barrage of thousands of miniaturized golden lightning bolts erupted out of the sphere, hitting the onlookers below right in the middle of their foreheads. Instantaneously, a sea of creatures from every story ever told exploded into the wide open, filling the streets and avenues next to the Chrysler Building, as well as the skies, with an unimaginable menagerie of dragons, fairies, leprechauns, trolls, comic heroes, wizards and witches, Olympian gods and goddesses, princesses, kings, queens, and a never-ending vast array of fanciful characters conceived in the mind of every storyteller who ever lived since the dawn of human history. It was an inconceivable and unthinkable sight, one that words can hardly and barely describe. A pantheon of legendary beings who stormed the sidewalks below and filled the heavens above. A tapestry of grand and resplendent beauty that dazzled the senses and bewildered the mind. It was as if Midtown Manhattan were transformed into a magical land, composed of every known legend written by man. There were wizards harmlessly battling each other with their staffs and wands raised above. Merlin was doing battle with Morgan Le Fay, as Gandalf and Saruman were combating Medea and the Greek sorceress Circe. The dragon known as Fin Fang Foom was seen chasing Saphira around the newly erected NY Times building, while Draco was seen spewing fire at the 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and Pete's dragon Elliot was sitting on top of MetLife building, appearing and disappearing on and off like a flickering light bulb. Thousands of fairy folk, such as pixies, brownies, leprechauns, and gnomes alongside nymphs, elves, mogwais, merpeople, fauns, and many other creatures swarmed the sidewalks and buzzed across the air. The Wicked Witch of the West was seen flying on her broomstick toward the nearby United Nations building, accompanied by a band of flying monkeys, and followed by her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East. Zeus, the god of Olympus, was spotted on top of the Empire State Building, shooting lightning bolts at the taxis below and turning them into hovercrafts, while his wife Hera was standing next to him, lashing out at Pegasus, who was circling the observation deck, looking for Perseus and Andromeda. Legions of comic superheroes were crisscrossing the city, demonstrating their awesome powers and wrestling one another to the ground. Aurael and Annette were standing on the floating carpet, stunned by the immensity and enormity of this fantastical congestion of imaginary beings that erupted and indeed detonated in front of their eyes like lava from an exploding volcano. "What have you done?" Annette hollered, sounding alarmed and somewhat panicked. But Aurael did not respond. He appeared to have been caught in some sort of trance, as if his consciousness were transported out of his body. His face, visible only to Annette, was expressionless, yet exuded a mysterious tranquility and equanimity. For a second, which seemed to last forever, Annette found herself trapped in Aurael's telepathic thought stream, merging her consciousness with his. It was achingly quiet and surprisingly serene, a feeling that resembled that of unsealing or unraveling an untold ancient secret. It was as though Aurael was communicating, albeit unknowingly, with the source of all creation, with the essence and birthplace of his omnipotence, which was transforming him with every passing hour into a being that defied comprehension. She yelled his name repeatedly, and found herself bouncing back into full consciousness, wrapped around his arms as he stared into her soul with his piercing emerald eyes. "Why?" he said. "You thought I was gone?" "Yes," she replied. "You seem to have been locked up and lost in some scary mind trip. I had to pull you out." "Thanks for coming to my rescue," he whispered, as he tilted the carpet away from the Chrysler Building and toward Manhattan's west side. Aurael swayed his hand and pointed his palm directly at the drifting pyramid, which immediately vanished from sight, dissolving into sparkling golden dust and showering the throngs below. The impact was rapid, causing an instantaneous reversal and transfiguration of the legendary creatures back into their original human forms, a process that was as delightful to observe as the original transformation. The crowds, clearly dazed and stupefied by the experience of physical metamorphosis, cheered loudly. "We love you, Auraman! We love you!" They waved goodbye, jumping up and down the sidewalk. The flying carpet continued its path, crossing Central Park and approaching West 80th Street, where it vanished from sight as Aurael and Annette rematerialized themselves in his apartment living room. "That was some surprise," Annette muttered as she sank into the comfortable sofa, looking visibly shaken. "Wasn't that a bit excessive?" "No," he replied. "Not at all. I felt an urge to personally connect with the revelers and touch them with a momentary dose of wondrous power. The kind of power that is at the core of my being. It's as though I was saying, 'Hello, friends,' shaking everybody's hands and smacking them with an out-of-this-world experience." "Now what?" Annette kept on insisting. "Now you answer your vibrating cell phone." Aurael chuckled and pointed at Annette's brand new Apple iPhone 3GS buzzing on the coffee table. "It's Cassie," Annette said, picking up the phone. "I wonder what she wants. Hey Cassie, how are you? Is everything okay? I am still at the hospital. Is Aurael there? Can you please put me on speaker?" she said, sounding as if she were attempting to catch her breath. "Yes, of course." "Is everything all right?" Aurael cried into the phone, raising his voice. "You sound like you just got off the racetrack. Are you still at Memorial Hospital?" "Yes," Cassie yelled back. "Yes, I'm still at the hospital. And frankly, it was more like a roller coaster ride rather than a race. As a matter of fact, I feel like I am still tripping." "What has happened, Cassie? What are you talking about?" "Well, I'm not quite sure, but I think it has something to do with Auraman and our encounter earlier at the bank. You see, the kids and I were watching the madness that unfolded by the Chrysler Building, and as soon as everybody transformed into their most favorite fictional characters, I too was transformed to Panacea, the Greek goddess of cures and universal remedy. Even though I wasn't anywhere close to the Midtown Auraman gathering, nor was I hit by any of those little lightning bolts." Cassie stopped momentarily, as she was still attempting to catch her breath and gather her thoughts. She asked the kids to keep quiet and then continued. "I was standing there in front of Tommy and the other children while the transfiguration occurred, stunned by its unexpected abruptness and concerned about the well-being of the youngsters who stood there frozen, staring at me as I was metamorphosizing into that illustrious goddess, emitting some sort of bluish energy field that quickly surrounded the kids and enveloped their bodies. They were totally soaked and inundated with this brilliant blue light. For a few seconds, they were completely stripped out of matter, turning into shimmering shadows, but quickly regaining their human forms a few moments later." "Are the children fine?" Annette interjected. "Are they okay?" "Fine?" Cassie replied, sounding as if she did not understand the meaning of the word fine. "They are completely healed. They are cancer-free. It was clear that they were somehow altered by the blue light that was radiating from me as that healing goddess character. They were no longer the sick kids plagued by cancer and doomed to die, whom I had come to visit and play with, but rather a vibrant bunch of toddlers and preschoolers with a full head of hair and an explosive vitality they were missing just a few minutes earlier. Are you hearing what I am saying, Aurael? Tommy is completely healed! Cassie screamed into the phone as she began crying uncontrollably. That is wonderful, Aurael shouted. That is absolutely wonderful. But the line went dead as Cassie hung up the phone, apparently too overcome with emotions and delirious with joy. It was you, wasn't it? Annette swiped at Aurael as she held the TV remote, changing the channels. You planned all this, the flying carpet, the ensuing madness in Paris, London, and here at home, and the miraculous healing of these cancer-stricken kids. What else do you have in store for us, Mr. Aurael Jones? Only time will tell, precious, Aurael shot back at Annette, turning her attention toward the television screen. Hold on a second, dear. The President is about to give a speech. Can you please increase the volume? They were both glued to the screen as President Collins approached the lectern, surveying the sea of journalists in front of him and staring directly at the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, good evening. In the last 48 hours, we have been exposed to some fantastical and incomprehensible events that appear to shatter our perception of reality, setting the stage for drastic and monumental changes in the course of human history. The entity known as Auraman saved the lives of a young gymnast in what is now known as the Perryton Rescue, turned 3 heartless thugs into little winged humanoid creatures, and was spotted riding a flying carpet in Paris, London, and New York City, causing some startling phenomena in its path, in which the laws of physical reality as we know them ceased to exist. A few moments ago, we were advised by the NY Memorial Hospital staff that all their cancer-stricken children have experienced total recovery after coming in contact with Miss Cassie LeBlanc, who earlier today was touched by Auraman's intense brightness. The President paused for a moment to sip some water, and then continued. What are we to make of these inconceivable feats of wonder? We are being reassured by the Rhinefield chief researchers Glenda and Osiris Jones that the intentions of the entity, who is of human origins, are benevolent as they are benign, and that, in a yet-to-be undisclosed date, Auraman will indeed make his true identity known to us. Undeniably, the episodes that have taken place in the last 2 days suggest quite clearly Auraman's adherence to moral norms commonly accepted in free and democratic societies. His intentions seem noble and reek of natural compassion and utter disdain for violence. His sense of humor and playfulness were noted as well. Intrigued as we are by these marvels, we asked our newly arrived hero to disclose his mission for our planet, his intentions and goals in gracing our world with his noble presence. We extend our hands in peace and friendship, and look forward to reciprocity. We call upon this new being to make himself known, disclose his human identity, and enlighten us with his profound knowledge and wisdom. Indeed, humanity looks forward to embarking on this new journey, this new path we were so unexpectedly been put on. Come forth, Auraman. The world awaits you. Thank you all. Wow, Annette exclaimed. That was short and to the point. Wait, it is not over, Aurael replied. Listen. A TNNC journalist was seen grabbing a microphone and shouting toward the President. Mr. President, how do you know Auraman is human? President Collins stopped momentarily and said, Mr. and Mrs. Jones were contacted telepathically by him, and he confirmed that he was indeed human, though conceived in a very unusual and unique manner. We take Auraman's words at their face value, since he does not appear to have any reason to lie. He could have easily maintained that he was of alien origin, but that would not have changed our assessment of him. We are certain that his yet-to-be-known intentions are completely altruistic. What role do you expect this godlike creature to fulfill? Simon Fuller from the OWL News Network questioned from behind a slew of reporters obstructing his way. I don't quite know the answer to that. The betterment and enlightenment of mankind, I suppose. He unquestionably did not come here to die for our sins, President Collins said jokingly as everyone burst out laughing. It is a matter to be discussed thoroughly with the creature as soon as he responds to our invitation. The President walked away from the lectern, followed by his security team, as the reporters continued to toss questions at his direction. What will happen if Auraman goes rogue? Will there be world peace now? Is Auraman... Annette turned the TV off, exchanging looks with Aurael as they both appeared somewhat dazed, attempting to digest the importance and enormity of what the future might hold for them. It seemed, for a twinkling of a second, that humanity's well-being was placed on their shoulders, a burden they were destined to carry jointly, an unimaginable task they were willing to embrace, but they weren't sure how. "This is more than what you opted for, isn't it?" Annette asked him, almost whispering. "Yeah, possibly," Aurael answered. "But I am sure it is not as daunting as it seems. I am actually looking forward to it." "Looking forward to what exactly?" Annette persisted. "To making a difference, dear. Making a difference." And before Aurael could finish his sentence, two monstrous-looking, elongated clawed, partially human and partially Australovenator dinosaur materialized out of nowhere right behind him, and immediately grabbed a hold of his neck, attempting to rip it apart. Aurael burst into flames instinctively, and began to phase in and out of existence as the freakish talons went right through his throat, but failed to fasten their grip on any actual matter. His brilliance suffused the claws as they continued in their vain struggle to hold on to any physical matter and shred it to bits. The horrid-looking hybrid hands finally disappeared as Aurael, still in a semi-corporeal state, fell inside the adjacent glass coffee table and completely merged himself inside it while regaining his human form. His body lay motionless, totally encased inside the glass. Annette watched in horror as she leaped forward, endeavoring to grab a hold of the claws, but remained totally numb mid-step, not being able to move at all, as though she were being frozen in time. But as soon as the claws disappeared, she instantly regained her mobility and rushed toward the glass coffee table, stretching her hand forward in a futile attempt to grab a hold of Aurael as he sank right into the table, leaving her hand trapped inside it as the glass solidified and regained its corporeal state. Annette, stricken with panic and outright terror, screamed uncontrollably as she struggled to release her captured hand, but to no avail. "Aurael!" she cried in despair as he lay still inside the glass. "Aurael!" But Aurael remained silent, appearing unconscious and comatose, his eyes shut, and his body lifeless, like that of a corpse. Chapter 18. Alfonso de Leon stood in the middle of his palatial living room, staring at the gigantic TV screen and cussing at the president. "Humanity awaits you," he says. "Really, I certainly do not await this omnipotent infestation to impose his grace on my business, do I?" He muttered to himself sarcastically, seething with rage and outright fury. Alfonso picked up an expensive tulip-shaped vase from the Japanese Edo period, situated on an opulent marble stand, and threw it against the wall, smashing the lavish art piece to bits. "Vida, where are you? Vida!" "I am right here, sir," Vida replied as she approached him. "Is anything the matter, sir?" She looked concerned. "Gather the troops," he responded somewhat angrily. "We are going to war." "What war, sir?" "The war to put an end to that dreadful illuminating candlestick before he turns us all into homunculi or whatever the infernal miniaturized winged humanoid is called. We need a plan. Fast. Schedule a meeting for Thursday, right away." "Yes, of course, sir. I'll get right to it," she answered, her voice trembling. "And another thing," he added. "See me at the fire-gazing altar in 10 minutes. We are in dire need of specific information about that creature." "Sure thing, sir. I'll be there as you requested," Vida replied as she stepped out of the room. Alfonso is one of the wealthiest people on earth, rich beyond belief, with vast real estate holdings, financial conglomerates, oil fields, banks, communication firms, and media outlets, weapon manufacturing plants, pharmaceutical companies, and many other assets in almost every country on the planet. Indeed, his mammoth empire stretched to every corner of the earth, and Forbes magazine has crowned him the richest man who ever lived, with a net worth of nearly 150 billion. Kings, presidents, prime ministers, and other potentates courted him, seeking his advice and stamp of approval for national projects, economic endeavors, and many other politically driven enterprises. Doubtless, Alfonso was blessed with the Midas touch, turning everything into gold, but his heart was as black as coal. He was a soulless creature steeped in sadistic violence and sheer and utter malevolence. His cruelty knew no boundaries, and his supposed benevolence was nothing but a calculated scheme to increase dependency and reliance on his good graces. The man was a trafficker in human misery that seemed to enrich his coffers exponentially. He stirred nation against nation, incited mayhem among competing companies, promulgated religious discord, and set the stage for strife and anger by financially supporting opposing ideologies so adherents may endlessly engage in violent upheaval and never-ending mutual recrimination. His mastery of double-crossing was unparalleled and unmatched. He would urge freedom fighters to keep on fighting, only to arm them as well as their rivals with top-notch weaponry, pocketing millions in the process, and ensuring a perpetual continuation of bloodshed. He would assume the role of a mediator in numerous world conflicts, only to keep them ablaze and ensure further despair. The man was evil incarnate, but to the millions of his innocent admirers around the world, de Leon was nothing but a paragon of virtue, a saviour of sorts, and the embodiment of compassion and decency. No doubt his deceiving good looks enabled him to substantiate the charade and win the hearts and minds of countless people who unknowingly fell into his trap like a moth to a flame. The man was blessed with an angelic face, soulful almond-shaped green eyes, hair as black as pitch, and a smile that turned hearts upside down. Yet under the guise of innocent baby-faced features and a warm, understanding appearance, there resided the most arrogant and self-obsessed tyrant who put to shame even Emperor Nero himself. He grew up in Berkshire, England, during the early 60s, despondent and achingly poor. His mother died while giving birth to him, and his father abandoned him at the age of 7. But fortunately enough, he was adopted by the eccentric Baroness de Leon, who was led to his orphanage by one of her psychic friends, who bequeathed to him her vast fortune, which catapulted his life in an unimaginable direction. The Baroness, blessed be her memory, loved him dearly and fell under his spell. Though she did ultimately sense that something was amiss with the child, she could never put her finger on it, nor did anyone else for that matter. The Baroness had an unquenchable passion for the occult, and an insatiable thirst for knowledge of the paranormal. A woman of deep faith, she believed that human beings were indeed created in the image of God, thus endowed with godly abilities that were yet to be unravelled. She dedicated an entire floor in her colossal mansion for psychic experimentation, long before the emergence of the Rhinefield Institute. She invited mediums and conducted seances under some sort of pseudo-scientific supervision, and became friends with numerous psychics, including the late Jean Dixon, who predicted the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in May 13, 1956, issue of Parade magazine, as well as Edgar Cayce, whom she met in 1943, 2 years before his death. Alfonso was no doubt inspired by her unwavering passion for the supernatural. The Baroness has taught him meditation and creative visualization at the age of 10. Alas, Alfonso became fascinated with the black arts, particularly ceremonial magic. Unbeknownst to her, he attempted to evoke the same demons conjured up by the biblical King Solomon. A year after her passing, on his 21st birthday, he resurrected the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an organization devoted to the study and practice of the occult, metaphysics, and paranormal activities during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in a fervent attempt to gain supernatural abilities via the invocation and summoning of malignant spirits and other infernal entities. He turned the Baroness's infamous floor into a semi-temple, where he conducted countless black magic rituals as prescribed by the late Aleister Crowley and Samuel MacGregor Mathers. Within a year of consistent and relentless pursuit to manifest his spirit in the flesh, Alfonso came to the sad and inevitable conclusion that the entire endeavour was nothing more than a futile trial and wishful thinking, a sad, delusional farce, utterly devoid of truth, and completely immersed in the nonsensical Judeo-Christian mythologies. Thus, he abandoned his quest for power through magic and disbanded the order. Yet in spite of that sombre realization, his passion for the paranormal never waned, and was rekindled during the mid-90s with the emergence of the Rhinefield Institute and the introduction of Marisol Flora Gonzalez in Copenhagen at a scientific gathering, where she was introduced by Professor Osiris Jones, Rhinefield's chief researcher. Miss Gonzalez's astonishing demonstration of her telekinetic power caught de Leon completely by surprise. He was dumbfounded and totally staggered, doubting his own eyes. Though Marisol's name preceded her, Alfonso was certain she was a fake, as well as all the other alleged mentalists introduced by the Rhinefield Institute as evidence for the existence of ESP. Still, Miss Gonzalez's manifestation of levitating heavy objects in front of such a large audience and floating a bouquet of flowers at Dr. Dankert's direction was so breathtakingly impressive. Alfonso realized right then and there that he had spent years of his life looking in all the wrong places. Inspired by her performance, he finally understood that the paranormal abilities he was seeking were not hidden in magical grimoires and ceremonial magic, but rather in hardcore scientific research and empirical experimentation. It was a moment of absolute clarity, a distinctness of thought and purpose, a life-sought nirvana on a scale he never experienced before, in spite of his familiarity with deep meditation and visualization techniques. A moment in time in which factual and observational proof for the paranormal begot a sense of empowerment in his own quest for dominion and control. He was reborn. Later on that night, he met Vida Simon at a dinner party, attended by scientists and parapsychologists, as well as private donors who finance many of the research work conducted by Rhinefield and other institutions. Vida was discovered by Dr. William Higgins, a known time travel theorist who, among other things, conducted his independent experimentation in clairvoyance and psychometry. Miss Simon was diagnosed with a schizoid personality disorder at an early age, yet possessed a remarkable ability to tap into the Akashic records, a collection of concise and detailed information of events encoded in the astral plane, i.e. a non-physical plane of existence, via fire gazing. She would concentrate and focus her attention on the blazing flames until they turned a gleaming, lustrous black. She would then lose consciousness and, while in a trance, provide knowledge of past, present, and future events of the object of her thoughts. Her accounts were eerily clear and spectacularly accurate, but because of her mental condition, they were devoid of emotional impressions and intent. Just like a camera, she photographed whatever piece of information she observed and delivered it in its raw state, without confounding it with her own perspective. Vida would first feel the people whom she read by sensing their auras or meditating on their printed image. She would then gaze into a fire altar, a stand with a large metallic bowl on top containing burning fire logs, dematerialize and become one with the black flames, only to reappear moments later with an exact narration of a person's past. The future, however, was somewhat harder to perceive and recognize, but despite that difficulty, Miss Simon was known to predict with downright accuracy many impending events in the lives of the people she read. Dr. Higgins theorized that Vida's disappearing fire-gazing routine created a sort of alternate and personal time realm, allowing her direct contact with the Akashic records, in which the past, present, and future were in flux, existing all at once. He was convinced that he could replicate the experience and mechanize the process in a digitized format, thus creating an alternative route for time travel. His premise stipulated the creation of a virtual reality software application that, in combination with the singularity of thought meditative process, would enable people to dematerialize and then reconstitute themselves in the astral plane, equipped with their sensory organs and ready to immerse and relive the past as well as the future. Dr. Higgins further insisted that the process was not like that of astral projection, since it would allow for the actual physical body to rematerialize in a non-physical plane, while vibrating in a unique semi-corporeal frequency, thus allowing for the retention of full physical and sensory impressions. The mechanism he conceptualized would neutralize the possibility of any time paradoxes or causality loops. It would provide time travelers with a choice to remain in the astral plane indefinitely, where they would age and die as if they were in the normal physical plane, or to restore themselves in our plane of existence, comparably aged, recalling the time travel experience, but not remembering its details, thus ensuring the integrity of the timeline point of departure. The time-traveling doctor introduced Miss Simon to Professor Osiris Jones and his team of researchers, but Vida refused to join the Rhinefield Institute in spite of Dr. Higgins' encouragement. When pressed by the doctor about why she felt so unrelenting concerning the matter, she confided in him that she was not able to sense Professor Jones and his wife Glenda at all, an anomaly she had never encountered with any other human, a fact she found disturbingly unnerving. Nevertheless, the doctor did share his findings with the Rhinefield Institute in hopes that the institute might speed up the research in teleportation and dematerialization. Before meeting with Miss Simon and Dr. Higgins, Alfonso secretly approached Osiris and Glenda with an offer to bankroll Rhinefield's future research, but was rebuffed by the board of directors chief, Dr. Gerald Epstein, who was convinced that his sole purpose was to weaponize supernatural abilities for sheer profit, rather than for the advancement of human potentiality. Dr. Higgins, however, who was short on research grants, embraced him with open arms and invited him to his hotel suite for a private session with Miss Simon. Indeed, de Leon's first encounter with her fire-gazing stunt was an absolute validation of his newly reborn spirit, and a further testament to the existence of true and unadulterated paranormal abilities. She stood there at the hotel suite, in front of a makeshift fire-gazing altar, staring intensely at the flames as they turned shiny black, and then, right in front of his eyes, dissolved into an ethereal, glittery smoke, which was immediately absorbed into the blazing flames. The flames danced erratically, increasing in size and volume, as Vida Simon's face pierced through them with a stare that nearly caused Alfonso's heart to stop. She finally emerged out of the fire, and gradually coalesced back into her normal physical form, as he watched her with utter disbelief. "How is Bernadette?" She asked him about his autistic half-sister, whom only he knew about. And while still in a trance, she muttered, "Baroness de Leon told you about the source of her wealth, which she never divulged to anyone except you, details of which are kept safely in a Swiss vault in Geneva." She went on detailing in the minutest fashion a plethora of events, words, codes, encounters, names, and explicit knowledge only he was privy to. She finally awoke from her trance-like state, acknowledging that she had forgotten everything she has just told him. Dr. Higgins, who joined them later, explained to the startled, nearly panicked de Leon that forgetting the knowledge and information she absorbed while in a state of stupor was a fail-safe mechanism to ensure her sanity. Astounded and moved beyond comprehension by the encounter he just experienced, Alfonso signed a comprehensive draft agreement with Dr. Higgins, providing him with a research grant to last a lifetime, in return for rights to potential financial gains resulting from his time travel research in general, and exclusive access to Miss Simon's ability in particular. He offered Vida a lucrative salary and a generous expense account, provided she agreed to reside in his lavish London mansion for an unspecified period. Suffice it to say, the deal de Leon struck with Dr. Higgins and Miss Simon that night was a life-altering juncture that served as a catalyst to his meteoric ascendancy to unimaginable wealth and power. It was Miss Simon's accurate reading of his competitor's character and past histories that gave him an unparalleled edge in assessing the success or failure of would-be business deals, and an uncanny ability to predict market trends and financial moves that almost always guaranteed a profitable transaction. Indeed, Vida was his golden goose, routinely pocketing and heaping for him fortune upon fortune in a staggering and overwhelming pace. Yet, because of the uniqueness of her power, her inability to remember the content of her readings once out of trance, and utter lack of concern for his boundless ambition, she wasn't quite sure how important her role was in his meteoric rise to fame and fortune. Her schizoid nature and outright apathy to human emotions virtually ensured that de Leon's secret of success would forever remain dormant and entombed in her lost, moribund soul. Though numb to emotional stimuli, Vida led a very pleasant and safe life. She was serene and calm, wrapped in her own existential bubble of fantasy. She'd emerge occasionally into the world of the living, joining de Leon in some social events, while avoiding others like the plague. She ran unique and specific errands for him, and focused her attention on keeping him informed and up to date on all the latest Rhinefield news, as well as other paranormal institutes. Once or twice a week, she would stop by at Dr. Higgins' lab for further experimentation and inspection of her ability. Her simplicity of thought and kind-hearted demeanour appeared to have ignited Alfonso's romantic interest in her. Though he did not find her incredibly attractive, he was convinced that her loyalty to him transcended anything he could possibly ever desire in a mate. She was beyond reproach, and could never be bribed into betraying him. Vida proceeded toward the cellar, where she practiced her fire-gazing routine and lit up the fire logs on top of the marble altar. She stood about 10 feet away from it, staring directly at the flat LED screen hanging on the wall above it. The room was painted still white and was spotlessly clean. There was a solid black rug covering the floor, and 2 tall, elongated candle holders behind her. "Are you ready, Vida?" de Leon asked her as he walked into the room. "Yes, sir, I am. May I proceed?" "Yes, Vida, of course. Please do," he replied. "Look at the image on the panel." Vida focused her attention at the image of Auraman, staring directly at him intensively, centering her sharp stare at his circular, faceless, shimmering aura. Then she looked away and redirected her attention at his overall appearance and the brilliance emanating from him, embracing his magnificence and absorbing it into her eyes. She then gazed at the fire for about 5 minutes, causing the black flames to expand and contract, splitting them apart till they detached themselves from the altar as they continued their graceful dance in the air. The flames finally turned shiny black and descended back onto the top of the altar, while Vida's body was phasing in and out of existence till she completely faded away and turned into an ethereal, dark smoke. The smoke hovered for about 15 seconds as it was soaked up right through the black fire, merging with it completely. Alfonso stood behind and followed her every move. He was calm and relaxed, and looked pointedly at the altar where she disappeared. The blaze suddenly increased in intensity, overflowing the altar and encompassing it entirely, and then shooting upward toward the ceiling, as though it was suddenly possessed. "Help me, Alfonso! Please, help!" De Leon heard Vida's cry emanating from the blazing inferno. The flames twisted and shifted erratically in opposite directions, turning around in circles, as they gradually assumed the shape of a horrified facial expression in the likeness of Vida Simon. The image's lips moved again as they cried out in agony. "Help me, sir! Please help me!" "What shall I do, Vida? Tell me what to do. How can I help you?" "Please, sir, please hurry!" "But what do you need me to do?" he cried again in exasperation. Alas, it dawned on him that, while he was able to hear her cries for help, she wasn't able to hear his reply. Fearful that he might lose his most precious asset, and seized by an utter sense of helplessness, Alfonso instinctively, as if by cue, calmed and relaxed his mind, took a few deep breaths, and meditated on the black flames while visualizing Vida Simon in his mind's eye. And then, in a commanding and decisive voice that thundered throughout the cellar, he called on the demon Baal, the head of all the infernal powers, and the first king of hell. "With these words I conjure thee, O great and mighty Baal. I summon thee in the name of Agla, Tetragrammaton, Elohim, Jehovah, Spiriton, Tremendum, Ogia, Plegaton. I invoke thee in the name of Habadanum, Ingodum, and Galbus. Come forth, O Baal. I exorcise thee. From the depths of hell I command thee. Release the maiden, and hear her cry. I dare you, spirit. Don't let her die. Heed my demand, and hearken my plight. Bring her forth from darkness to light. Show me thy power. Show me thy might, that I may witness your wonders tonight." Alfonso repeated the incantation 3 times with ferocity and fervour born out of acute sense of urgency and alarm. And, to his utter shock and amazement, he suddenly found himself surrounded by thick darkness, a place of nothingness devoid of matter and bereft of substance. A twilight zone of sorts where existence could be summed up as awareness in its most simplistic form. Pure consciousness stripped of physical form as we know it, yet filled with a subtle sense of physical being. De Leon could not see his body, yet felt his heart pumping, his chest moving in a slow but steady rhythm, and his blood circulating from head to toe, while the breath from his nostrils filled the spaceless void. "Where am I?" he pondered. "Where is Vida?" Other than a sense of his own self, Alfonso couldn't perceive any other presence around him, but the thought of Miss Simon disrupted the void and ruptured the thick darkness. He could now clearly hear Vida's cries for help as bright white light abruptly appeared in front of him. The light was ferociously intense and blinding, but De Leon, nevertheless, stared directly at it and looked beyond it, attempting to fine-tune it and adjust it to a clear and visibly defined form. There she was, right in front of him, her body caught in a glittering pentagram encased in a moving circle. She seemed to be locked in the middle of a whirling black vortex emanating from the center of the five-pointed star, which pulled her slender figure farther and farther into the abyss. Vida's hands were stretched forward, striving to grasp at a golden human shadow that stood slightly away from her, radiating profusely. Alfonso scrutinized Vida's hands and felt like his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. What happened to her hands? He thought as he approached closer to her. Her dainty, fragile hands have turned into a pair of disgusting, elongated claws, partially human and partially australovenator dinosaur, lunging at the golden shadow and grasping at its perceived throat, seeking to rip it apart while staring at Alfonso in absolute and total horror. "Help me, Alfonso," she cried, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I am not doing this. There is something here with us. Help me, please." Instantaneously, De Leon appeared to have regained his physical form and stretched his arms forward in an effort to grab a hold of her hands. Alas, his hands went right through her claws, failing to grab her. Vida continued to scream as her body kept to its unstoppable descent, inch by inch, into the swirling black void stemming from the center of the pentagram. "Vida!" De Leon yelled at her. "Look into my eyes. Calm down, Vida. Look into my eyes. Focus." He said it in a relaxed but assertive voice. De Leon was staring at her while invoking one of the most ancient primordial deities known to mankind, straight out of the pages of the nefarious Necronomicon. "O great Ziku!" he hollered in a commanding voice. "Zi-ki-ya-kan-pa! Zi-ana-kan-pa! Zi-din-ger-ki-ya-kan-pa! Zi-din-ger-anan-kan-pa! Hear me, O thou Ziku! Come forth in the name of Gigam Agampa! Zi-kia-kampa! Zi-ana-kampa!" He was repeating the chant. Alfonso's eyes began to glow like gigantic red rubies, gradually turning into yellow-orange coloration, similar to the firelogs used at Vida's gazing altar. "Keep on looking," he instructed her. "Keep on looking at my eyes. If you're about to read me, Vida. Read my past. Blend into my fire." Drowning in an excruciating pain and feeling her life slowly being drained out of her with every passing moment, Vida gazed into Alfonso's eyes and immediately began to flux, dematerializing and turning into an ethereal black smoke that shifted right through De Leon's burning, flaming eyes. For a moment, time stood still, and Alfonso found himself back in that place of nothingness, where absence was thought, and thought was absence, where existence was a concept lacking physical property, where consciousness was life, and life was but a file of past, present, and future intertwined, braided together in an inseparable bond. It was a place beyond the beyond, where darkness and light were transfixed and suffused in an embryonic eternal dance, battling for dominion. It was a transcendent point in reality, where De Leon's awareness was reduced to its most pristine form, a living, breathing spark of creation, all-knowing, all-encompassing, and one with universe itself. A flash of blue lightning struck the cellar floor, and the two found themselves back in the fire-gazing room, curling on the ground in a fetal position, and breathing heavily. "Are you all right, Vida?" Alfonso asked her. "Yes, sir, I am. Thank you for coming to my aid. I am forever in your debt. I would have remained trapped in that nothingness if it wasn't for you." "How did I even get there?" "I pulled you in, sir," she replied. "I have that ability too, but I would not have been able to do so without your tacit approval and cooperation. You went to a great length to ensure that, and your incantation and conjuration of Baal sped up the process." "Aha, I see." Alfonso nodded, feeling somewhat disappointed since he was convinced that, for the first time in his life, he was successful in invoking a spirit to do his bidding. "And how do you explain your release from the black vortex at the center of the pentagram?" he quizzed. "You dematerialized while looking into my eyes." "Yes, sir, I did. Your eyes lit up like the firelogs on the fire-gazing altar when you asked me to read your past. I knew exactly what you were attempting to do." "And what was that, Vida?" You recognize that once I started gazing into your eyes, I would start to flux, phasing in and out of existence, and eventually turn into a cloud of ethereal smoke, a sure way to escape whatever it was that was holding me, she said in a quiet but firm voice. What or who took hold of you? Any idea? Alfonso kept on asking. I am not sure, sir, Vida gasped in desperation, her hands shaking. I really don't know. She took a deep breath and continued. From the first moment I merged with the black flames, I sensed that something was wrong. All I could see and feel was nothingness, absolute nothingness, as though Auraman was devoid of past, present, and future, a timeless creature, an entity of no beginning or end. It is absolutely insane and makes no sense. All beings, human and non-human alike, leave behind them a historical imprint, a trail of sorts, but not Auraman. That is impossible, Alfonso interjected. What are you insinuating? That Auraman is a god? No, sir, not at all, but I'm not quite sure what to make of it. There was a stillness of time when I attempted to gaze into Auraman's essence, as if he was stripped of any substance or physical matter as we know it, a creature of focused thoughts, an embodiment of wishful thinking, a phantom born of deep desire, infused with the power of divine light. Frankly, sir, it felt as though I was staring into an infinite abyss, and then it happened. What happened? De Leon asked, listening attentively to each word that came out of her mouth. A glowing shadow appeared out of nowhere in front of me, while the five-pointed star popped right behind me. They emerged simultaneously. Vida's body began to shake as she was recalling her experience. Alfonso held her right hand gently and whispered softly, Calm down, Vida. You are safe now. Take a deep breath. You are safe. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your kindness, she replied and then went on. There was an unexplained presence there, bereft of any impressions and lacking any feelings or emotions, a state of existence that defies definition, akin to the same emptiness I sensed when gazing at Auraman's image, yet this particular essence discharged a tremendous sense of urgency and purpose, an all-encompassing readiness. It wanted something, but I couldn't tell what. A powerful jolt of energy broke my concentration as I suddenly found myself trapped in the pentagram while lunging forward toward the glowing shadow's neck and attempting to tear it apart. I looked at my hands and realized that they turned into those grotesque and repugnant semi-human, semi-dinosaur claws. It was obvious they had a life of their own, as I was not able to control them. They lashed out at the shadow repeatedly, determined to rip its neck wide open while pulling it in the direction of the vortex behind me, till it eventually broke free and disappeared. Clearly, sir, if you did not heed my cries, I would have been lost inside the void. Vida paused, sighing at length while composing herself, and then looked at Alfonso somewhat sheepishly. I have felt that nothingness before, sir, that desolation, that blank sense of emptiness. I am sure of that. Where? De Leon responded, as if he was suddenly bitten by a serpent. When? Come on, Vida, think. When did you feel like that before? At the Rhinefield lecture in Copenhagen, when Marisol Flora Gonzalez demonstrated her telekinetic powers. Before her performance, Dr. Higgins introduced me to Glenda and Osiris Jones, the head researchers of the Rhinefield Institute. I felt absolutely nothing when I shook their hands, an absolute hollowness, as though they were both apart and distinct from recorded human history. I just couldn't sense anything. Bingo! Alfonso cried with sheer delight. Bingo! I knew it! I knew that this creature was somehow linked to Rhinefield. De Leon stood up while assisting Vida off the ground, as she was still quivering and unsettled. I must hand it to those two, he said to her. They have created the ultimate superweapon. No doubt they intend to take over the world, and use that vile monstrosity of theirs to dominate this planet, or, better yet, to reign over and subjugate the universe. For years they have lulled us into a state of complacency and inaction with their lofty preaching about expanding human consciousness and ascending in the evolutionary ladder, while all along plotting our demise. What are you talking about, sir? Vida responded sharply. Isn't Auraman a force for good? Everybody knows that. Even the president confirmed that earlier tonight. I think you should just keep quiet and just shut up now, Vida. No one asked for your opinion. Alfonso groused and walked away from her. He then turned and looked back at her. Don't you see, Vida? The Joneses are evil, and just like Lucifer, the bearer of light and the master of all wickedness, they have brought into this world a creature of light, an exact reflection of the Prince of Darkness before he was cast out from heaven. They are hell-bent on bringing our downfall and extinction. But to what end, sir? What do they stand to gain from our destruction? Vida persisted. I am not quite sure. They do not strike me as deeply devout and religious people bent on resurrecting the devil from the depths of hell. It is likely they do not even believe in Satan's existence, and probably refer to him as a myth. I use that analogy to further stress the point that they are evil, and that their true intentions are nefarious, aimed at wreaking calamity and misery in our lives. Evil is just evil for evil's sake, Vida. It needs no reason or motives. Its desire to unleash suffering and pain is inherent. It is the sum and the whole of its deep-rooted essence. It derives an innate pleasure from inflicting devastation, and it is in constant pursuit to quench that addictive thirst for violence and mayhem. He continued, Would you ponder about why fire is hot? Of course not. It is hot because it is in its nature to be so. Granted, the Joneses are not inanimate objects, and it is possible that, by destroying their planet or turning it upside down, they might be advancing a yet unknown cause or a goal. But their ultimate reasoning in creating that monstrosity is irrelevant and beside the point. They need to be stopped, Alfonso said in a commanding and firm voice. And how will you accomplish that, sir? Vida asked in her soft, low voice. By enlisting your help, of course. How else? Me, sir? How? I'm not even able to read them. That is indeed correct, Vida, but you are quite able to read all of those around them. Call the Thursday meeting off. This job is for you and me alone. What do you expect me to do, sir? Call Professor Osiris Jones first thing tomorrow morning and advise him that you changed your mind and would like to participate in his psychic research. He has been attempting to recruit you ever since he met you in Copenhagen. It's an excellent opportunity to gather more information about Auraman. I am certain of it. I will make all the necessary arrangements for your immediate departure and extended stay in Manhattan. You'll contact me with updates as soon as information becomes available. You must keep utmost discretion about all this. I am counting on you, Vida. Yes, sir, of course, Vida replied, still feeling weak and wobbly. Alfonso concluded his instructions and was ready to depart, but suddenly he stepped back and gently pulled Vida toward him, placing a passionate kiss on her glossy lips. Vida stood there stunned and motionless as if struck by lightning, too startled to grasp the enormity and meaning of her life's first kiss.